The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 361 Lucky Sutra. For a moment, Lex didn't register what he read and his mind blanked. Then he rubbed his eyes and read the notification again. System notification. New system detected. Analyzing the secondary system. Murder system grade D+ detected. Host can choose to assimilate with the secondary system and have two concurrent systems, or absorb it to strengthen the existing system. Please note, this decision will be fixed and final, and will result in the same action for all subsequent systems discovered. System notification. Murder system grade D+ detected. Murder in cold blood, one and all, to gain system points and receive a boost to your strength, as well as tools to help plan out intricate murders. The greater the murder, the better the reward. Murdering special, high-value targets yields better results and rewards. From weapons to technique to formations and golems, the system will provide you a smooth path to the most efficient murders. Lex read the notification again and again, his mind racing. This answered one of the greatest questions he'd had about his system for a very long time, and yet also resulted in more questions. First of all, he was not the only one with a system. While his system may be unique, though he wasn't even sure of that at the moment, it was a fact that others also had systems. It also did not mention any grade in his system or anywhere else, so he had no idea what grade his own system was, if it even had one. Moreover, the purpose of the systems did not seem to overlap much. After all, his system was targeted towards hosting guests and even promoted charity work of sorts, while this fellow literally had a system that encouraged murder. That raised the question, where did these systems come from, and what was their purpose? His system, especially, confused him greatly. As his understanding of the universe was expanding, he began to understand how truly minuscule he was in front of the capabilities of his own system. In that case, what could it ever hope to get from him? This was a question for which he had no answer. After all, it could directly use its abilities to trap Lex and take whatever it wanted from him, but it didn't. Maybe there was something the system needed him to do. After all, he did not know if this fellow was already a murderer before he got the system, or had been influenced by the rewards the system promised to enter onto this path. Whatever the truth of the matter may be, it was a fact that Lex's life had been inherently linked to the systems for good. Even if he wanted to escape the influence of the systems, he would have to do it by getting stronger first. For that, ironically, the system itself played the greatest role. If, somehow, his system could become stronger, then it would aid him greatly. Especially because he was not at all interested in going on random murdering sprees. Just as he was having these thoughts, a change appeared on the murderer's body, and a couple of items appeared. There was one crystal as well as a wide bracelet of pure gold. Before Lex could pick them up to observe, he appeared once again in his room back at the tavern, the murderer's body laying at his feet. He quickly scanned the tavern to ensure all was well and breathed a sigh of relief. Rick was controlling the space array around the tavern, so no monster was able to enter during his absence. "Mary, do you care to explain?" Lex said, calming himself down. He knew this was not an opportunity he wanted to miss, but before he did anything, he wanted to get as much information about it as possible. "I do not have the authority to comment on anything related to the system, beyond what I've already told you. If you want my recommendation on what option to choose, I am not allowed to comment on that either. All I can say is, think back to your own experience when the system was new. How did it encourage you to complete its quests? How did it threaten you? I am not saying that other systems will do the same, just that it is something you should remember." As soon as she spoke, Lex's mind flashed back to the early days when the system would threaten him to complete quests by stating the punishment for failure was death. If the murder system gave him a quest and set a similar punishment, Lex would be stuck. He would have no option but to complete the quest. The thought gave him shivers. He absolutely could not get more systems. As for the midnight system, it was already strong enough to send him to other realms, and so firmly had his life under his control. Making it stronger would not change that fact, but it could at least increase whatever benefits he could get from it. With his mind made up, Lex selected to have his system absorb the murder system, to become stronger. The murderer's body exploded and a small golden ball rushed into Lex's body the next moment. A strong sense of déjà vu hit Lex as he recalled a shooting star, but this time, fortunately, Lex was not knocked out. Instead, his system interface disappeared, and only the words "updating" appeared in its place. This made Lex nervous, for he used the system for a lot of things, even at the tavern, but all he could do now was wait. Also, he could clean. For once, the system's automatic cleaning function wasn't available, so he had to clean up the mess created by the murderer's body by himself. Well over an hour, Lex sat back down beside the window he opened to air out his room, and investigated the 2 items that appeared from the murderer's body. The gold bracelet looked like pretty standard jewelry, right up until Lex channeled his spirit energy into it. Much like the book that appeared in the ring given to him by John, his worker at the inn, a scripture appeared in his mind from the bangle. For some reason, though, reading a single word seemed to drain him mentally. He was only able to make out Lucky Sutra before he became too exhausted to continue. In fact, he became so tired, Lex fell asleep the very moment he stopped reading. He woke up groggy and with a throbbing headache. It was only after he asked Roan to bring him a rejuvenating tea that felt better, slightly. He put the bangle away, unwilling to look too deeply into it for now, though he seemed to have understood much about his fight with the killer. This so-called Lucky Sutra must have played a role in constantly keeping him alive, and why he mentioned that he was very lucky. It was definitely something to look forward to later. Rubbing his throbbing head, Lex reached out towards the crystal and reluctantly poured his energy inside. This time, instead of a book, the crystal revealed itself as the controlling mechanism for the formation around the town. How lucky, Lex couldn't help but comment, his facial expression eerily similar to the killer's as he said so. Lex himself, though, did not feel anything odd. It was natural that, if the killer had something to control the formation, it would fall into Lex's hands after the killer had been dispatched. Not wasting a single moment, Lex started to focus on the crystal, trying to understand how it worked and how he could control it to restore the town to its previous state. During this time, he did not notice at all as he subconsciously wore the gold bracelet onto his left hand. His body, which had gone through an arduous battle, also did not warn him via the usual instincts that anything was wrong, as he subconsciously used a portion of his spirit energy and started channeling it through the bangle. As the gold bangle tightened around his wrist, Lex felt nothing, and when it began to fuse into his hand, Lex was too engrossed in the crystal. But that's when things became odd. The bangle, which at first seemed to be quickly melding into Lex's hand, slowed down. It was supposed to have fused into his hand seamlessly, like a person jumping into the sea holding rocks. Instead, it became like a person slowly falling in tar. It was thick and sticky, and while the bangle was still fusing with his hand, it was way too slow. Still, Lex was oblivious to all of this. When he finally managed to figure out the controls of the formation, he murmured, "How lucky," and began setting things straight. Turning on the lights would not make the existing monsters go away, but at least it would stop new ones from forming. The mayor, if he was still alive, would have a much easier time reclaiming the town. Chapter 362 Overdrive State. Turning the lights back on was not as straightforward as it seemed, mainly because every formation Lex had ever interacted with before this was generated by his system. As such, the formations would directly act according to his intentions, and Lex did not need to bother with the details of how the formation actually performed the relevant action. Now, on the other hand, there were hundreds of options for Lex to interact with, and he could not easily figure out what they did. A simple example of this is taking an avian beast that's been flying all its life with the aid of its wings, with each and every maneuver easily performed at a whim, and putting it in the pilot seat of a commercial airline. It could not even begin to comprehend what the various buttons did. After a good bit of trying with no significant result, Lex decided to stop and take a break. He needed to reflect on his battle with the killer a bit. At the time, he hadn't noticed, but the signs of the killer being a system user were all there. From the get-go, being able to teleport Lex without any prior warning was a significant indicator that he was not simple. Moreover, being able to spontaneously summon monsters and mannequins, having a mannequin heal him, randomly disappearing or teleporting away. To be honest, any one of these abilities was extremely powerful, and had they been in the hands of anyone more competent, the fight would have been much harder. Lex was not belittling himself, for he had literally survived a meteor crash, but he also needed to be aware of the fact that the opponent had a system that directly increased his battle prowess. Should he face such an opponent again, and the possibility that he would encounter such foes in the future was great, he needed to be better prepared. After all, now that he was sure other systems existed, he would constantly be on the lookout for any hints or clues of system users. Similarly, with the renown of the Inn increasing, he had to anticipate that other system users might suspect him as well. He tried to summarize the similarity between himself and the murderer that could be used to identify a system user and be on the lookout for those attributes, while hiding the same features in himself. The most common was the random appearance of new items, such as the mannequins. This was bad, as he had already displayed that ability multiple times at the inn. Next was the ability to teleport. He had displayed that as well. As for his other peculiarities, Lex suspected they had much to do with the Lucky Sutra and not the system. He would need to do more research on the matter to come to a conclusion. With that out of the way, Lex then thought of the overdrive state that he had entered during his last fight. It was significantly different from his flow state. During the flow state, he would achieve extreme mental clarity. His focus would improve and he would be able to perform any and all actions to the best of his physical capabilities due to the extreme control and precision he gained over his own body. The overdrive state was all that and more. It was not tapping into the maximum mental clarity or aptitude or focus he could physically achieve, but directly increasing it for a short duration. But, for now at least, the increase was limited to the mind only. That meant he was technically not any stronger than his normal maximum physical limit. But, with his mind working much faster and with greater and more detailed control of his body, he could easily create the necessary situation to exceed his limits. The drawback was, once the overdrive state ended, if he overused it, he would be completely mentally drained. The greatest benefit, at least as far as Lex was concerned, was that he could sense how to enter such a state. It had originally been triggered by his strong sense of pride. He could feel that, with a little effort, he could enter the state again. He closed his eyes and focused, concentrating on his pride. What was he proud of? It was not something that appeared out of thin air. Even if he set aside everything the system gave him and his success with the inn, his repeated success and achievements in the crystal realm were definitely his own. Just the fact that the crazy man Vernan wanted to recruit him into strange classes, and that everyone mistook him for being born from royalty, spoke volumes. Heck, he single-handedly took control of various minor realms when even someone like Quenhild went with a group. He was not just Lex Williams, a simple programmer from New York anymore. He was a genuine cultivator who was cutting out his own path in the universe. Just as he was swelling on these thoughts, his overdrive state was triggered. This time, since he was not overtaken by feelings of wanting to kill someone, he could actually take the time to appreciate all the changes. He could feel how his brain influenced his emotions. He could feel how each heartbeat affected every step he took. He could feel each breath nourishing his body. He could feel his arm. Wait a minute. Lex turned to look at his left arm and was very seriously surprised to find himself wearing the golden bracelet, but more than that, he was surprised to find it melding with his arm. Alarm bells rang in his head as he analyzed what was going on, and realized that, even without being conscious of it, he had been running his spirit energy through his arm and into the bracelet. The moment he cut off the energy, the fusion stopped and, after a few agonizing moments, the bracelet popped free of his hand and fell to the ground. He dared not pick it up and check the condition of his body again and again. All seemed to be fine, and his instincts gave him no warning of anything good or bad happening. It was as if his body failed to recognize this as anything but an ordinary piece of jewelry. He didn't know if that was a good thing or bad, but he used the space formation to seal the bracelet for now. He dared not mess with it again before the system returned. Maybe then he could use something to scan this item. In fact, when he thought about it, it was very lucky that he even considered trying out his new overdrive state. Had he delayed the matter for a few hours more, the bracelet may have completely fused with him. He did not know what would have happened if it did, but he didn't want to find out by experimenting on himself. Lex exited his overdrive state and went back to the bar. He needed a drink. As usual, the hall was as crowded as could be. Most people were forcing themselves into a state of escapism by playing board games and drinking all day and night long, and with the tavern at beyond capacity, there was almost no room. It would have felt extremely congested if everyone wasn't cooperating with each other very well and behaving appropriately. Of course, Lex's firm control over the space in the tavern, and his emphasis on maintaining decorum greatly helped as well. "You don't normally drink," said Roland, the enterprising young businessman who was sipping hot chocolate while sitting at the bar. He looked sleep-deprived and worn out, with heavy dark circles under his eyes. Lex did not know much about his personal life, despite spending so much time together, but he understood the kid enough to realize he was mature beyond his age. Unfortunately, with that maturity came stress and anxiety that not everyone knew how to manage. "I'm celebrating," said Lex as he took a sip of a chilled glass of Coca-Cola. "Celebrating? What is there to celebrate?" the kid asked in a defeated voice. "I have a scoop," said Lex, teasingly. "Are you interested in the latest news? From beyond the tavern?" "From beyond the tavern?" he asked, suspiciously. Unable to guess anything, the kid relented and asked Lex the news. "The problem with the light formation is going to be fixed real soon," Lex whispered. Roland was startled upon hearing the news, but then gave Lex a defeated smile. "I'm not a kid, you can't fool me." Shaking his head in disappointment, Roland got off his seat and went to look for his friends. Although he knew nothing would happen to them at the tavern, he couldn't help but worry. Lex said nothing and only watched him leave, his hand fumbling the crystal in his pocket. After he got some rest, he would test his overdrive state on figuring out how to manipulate the formation. That should speed things up. A loud slamming sound woke Lex from his musings. Chapter 363 Abnormal Luck. Startled by the sound, the whole tavern looked towards the door that had been swung open. A brutish man, covered from head to toe in filth and monster blood, stumbled in, dragging behind him a massive double-sided axe. Well, it was formerly double-sided, but now one side had been corroded away by something. Even now the axe gave off the scent of burning metal. The man looked at the crowded tavern room, his weary face showing confusion and non-comprehension. Before he could say anything, Mario Ricci rushed up to him with a concerned face and checked up on his body. They said nothing, but Lex strongly suspected that they were already talking through their spirit sense. "Lex, is it possible to get a private room for a short while?" Mario suddenly asked, turning towards him. Lex raised an eyebrow out of curiosity. He placed a great deal of importance on Mario because of his ring and possible connection to the Noel family. As such, his current reaction greatly attracted Lex's attention and aroused his interest towards this mysterious man. After all, as someone who had spent some time at the tavern, he should have known that there was basically no room at the tavern currently. Before he formed any theories on the identity of the worn-out man, Mario continued to speak. "Let me introduce you. This is the Honorable Mayor of Babylon, and a distant relative of the Noel family. There are some matters we need to handle that require a bit of privacy." A distant relative of the Noel family, Lex immediately wished he had the ability to snoop on conversations like he could back at the inn. At the moment, the only way he had to properly even scan what was happening in the tavern was using the space formation. Still, the better his relations with these people, the better his chances of learning the secrets of this place. "Don't take too long," Lex finally said, deciding to accommodate their request. "As you know, we're extremely short on space, and forcing too many people in one space will make everyone uncomfortable." The mayor was still groggy, and barely registering what was happening as Mario led him by the hand to one of the private rooms Lex emptied out. After spending so much time at this place, he had come to understand how excellent the sound insulation in the private rooms were, so he was not at all worried that they would be spied upon. Moreover, any conversation they would have would be through their spirit senses anyway. After inquiring if the mayor required any medical attention, to which Mario answered no, they closed the door and began their meeting. Lex, too, retreated from the main hall, back to his room. So far the monsters that had spawned were not too strong, with only their numbers as their greatest asset. But if even the mayor had been brought down to this level, then things must be getting bad. He immediately entered his overdrive state and began deciphering how to use the formation crystal properly. Even if he could not restore the lights, allowing communication with outside the formation should allow them to request for help. The crystal allowed him to observe each and every change that was happening to the formation, so with every proverbial button he flicked using the crystal he looked for changes. He spent an entire hour doing this, before he was too exhausted to continue his overdrive state and took a rest. This would be a tedious process. A teleportation formation flashed, and the crown prince of the Hum nation appeared amongst a crowd of people who were traveling to the Noel family's lands. Although this piece of land seemed like it was independent of any nation, it was only because geographically it was too far from any of the nation's borders. That did not mean, in any whatsoever, that it escaped the influence of the nations. As a human ruler, no matter how far he actually was from Hum nation, there was no way he would be able to continue his reign without the hidden support from Cornelius. Such was the case for many so-called independent states. It was just that the public did not need to know what went on behind closed doors. Regardless of all that, it was that connection that resulted in various teleportation formations that allowed travel even from the farthest regions. After all, it was unknown when they would need emergency help, and even Cornelius himself would take months if not years to travel to the farthest regions without these formations. In his hand, he still held a plastic fork and, after checking something, the prince dashed out into the darkness, uncaring of any monsters in his path. A short while into his journey, however, he encountered another man making his way through the darkness. Considering that he might be lost and in need of aid, the prince stopped near him. But, after appearing right beside the man, he stood awkwardly. It had been too long since he had spoken to another person while sober. He wasn't sure what to say. Farty, on the other hand, was as genial and excited as always. "Hello, friend," he exclaimed while slicing an elephant-sized monster in half. "Would you happen to know where Babel is? Or Baby? Maybe it was Baba? Ah darn, I cannot remember the name of the town, but it had an amazing tavern." The crown prince's eyes flickered at the mention of a tavern, but then they dulled. How could he expect to find something that could get him drunk out here in the middle of nowhere? "I do not know the name, but I'm heading towards a town. You can follow me and ask for directions from there." "Excellent," he replied, his mood improving drastically. As soon as he agreed, the prince put his hand on Farty's shoulder and carried him along as he zoomed through the darkness. The speed was faster than anything Farty had ever experienced and he was startled, but he quickly realized that he was not affected by the speed at all, and began to enjoy the experience. That is, until they reached Babylon and found the formation shutting the town shut. Both Farty and the prince grew extremely serious upon witnessing such a sight. 4 days later, Lex chugged a drink very similar to coffee, except that instead of caffeine, it flooded his body with easy-to-absorb spiritual energy. Unless Lex quickly used up the energy, it would dissipate and not get absorbed into his body. But the benefit of this was, if Lex was drastically using up the spiritual energy in his body, it would automatically get absorbed into his spirit energy pool and allow him to continue using energy for much longer. He needed this drink to facilitate his use of the overdrive state. After 4 days of continuous use, he learned that it was not only his mental energy that was drained, but it exhausted him physically as well as put a strain on his spiritual energy. Still, after 4 arduous days, he could proudly say he had gained enough of an understanding of the formation that he could finally return things to normal. It would take one final push. He entered the overdrive state and immediately began manipulating the formation. He had to be careful, For he had learned through continuous experimentation that controlling the lights in the town was perhaps the simplest function of this formation. It definitely did many more things way too complex for him to understand, but they were not his problem. Soon things would return to normal. But Lex remained unaware that, in the main hall of his tavern, the mayor and Mario exchanged worried looks. Things had turned extremely bleak when an important component of the town's formation had been turned off a few days earlier for just a few minutes. That was actually Lex testing out the function of the formation crystal. As a result, some energy signatures that the formation kept hidden had leaked for a few moments, and monsters hidden in the deep, dark depths of the sea had been attracted. Those monsters were way too strong for even the mayor to handle. No matter what happened, they needed to make sure that they could request for aid from the Noel family before something else happened to the formation. Otherwise, the repercussions would spread far beyond just Babylon. Unfortunately, the luck of the entire town had been undergoing abnormal changes of late. Of the millions of buttons, Lex messed with the single most dangerous one, just long enough to attract trouble. And now, at the worst possible time, he finally figured out how to turn the formation off. Just as suddenly as the town had been blanketed in darkness, the lights turned back on, revealing a town nearly destroyed, and an army of monsters filling the streets. The gentle hum of various formations returning to life filled the town. The hum was followed by an earth-shattering howl as a massive creature exited from the sea. Chapter 364, Fruit Trifle. From the dark, ebbing waters of the coast, two massive claws emerged and set themselves deep within the docks. The ground crumbled under their weight, and the earth itself began to split when the creature they belonged to put pressure on them to pull itself out of the water. A massive head, 30 feet, 9.1 meters, large emerged from the water, two equally massive tusks emerging from the base of its jaw and ran closely down the length of its face. The weight of its gaze froze countless monsters nearby, but their existence was too paltry to even notice to the behemoth. Unable to sense the aura it had traced all the way here, the creature continued to lift itself out of the water, its body emerging from depths like a nightmare escaping a dream. Zagan, the Ocean King, was not impatient. It would take its time and search thoroughly. On the other side of the town, Farty and the Crown Prince had been testing the formation for its abnormalities. They did not want to take any drastic action until they fully understood the situation. So when the formation returned to normal, they were taken by surprise. But when the town full of monsters revealed itself to them, their expressions fell. Before they could even completely comprehend the situation and even consider eliminating the monsters, Zagan had revealed itself. Farty instantly reached into his pocket, looking for the emergency summoning talisman for his father, but found his pockets empty. Now, weeks after it happened, Farty was struck hard by the truth once more. He was no longer a part of the Noel family. The prince wasted not a single moment and unleashed his strength in full, the radiance of his immortal aura illuminating the war-torn town with its splendor. With speed mere mortals could not comprehend, he appeared in front of Zagan, only acting in deterrence and daring not to attack first. Of the many monsters born from the darkness, very few ever reached the immortal realm. Moreover, for them to reach the immortal realm, they would need to live in the darkness for hundreds of thousands of years. But even amongst the immortal monsters, there was a higher class that not only gained complete sentience, but had strength and recognition so great they had names and titles that were passed down through generations. Zagan, the Ocean King, was one such monster, and the prince recognized him immediately. "This is human territory, Zagan," the Crown Prince said in a warning tone. "Withdraw lest the situation escalate." It was not that the prince feared Zagan. Honestly speaking, the prince feared no one other than his own father. Instead, it was the certainty that if they fought, the entire town would be destroyed that kept him from taking action. His appearance was right out terrifying, but Zagan did not have a feisty personality. He did not get aggravated or agitated. This was because, with his strength, getting what he wanted was always a certainty. It was merely a matter of getting what he wanted a bit sooner or later. So Zagan did not bother replying. Very lazily, he focused on the prince and shot lasers from his eyes. In the beaten and battered lands that had just experienced the greatest struggle it had witnessed in years, two immortals began to fight. The mere mortals down below could do naught but cower in fear and hope to avoid even the gusts released from their battle, for it would be lethal. As anarchy reigned from the skies and the laws of the world itself bent in the air, the triplets served fruit trifles to the tavern guests. With illusion formations protecting the tavern from the view of what happened on their doorsteps, and a space formation protecting the building, everyone inside was completely unaware of what was happening. Lex, after fixing the formation, surveyed everything. Technically, the formation also had defensive features to attack monsters, but he dared not try to activate them for he had no way of differentiating friends from foes. But now that new monsters wouldn't spawn, the nascents and even the golden core cultivators would easily handle the monsters. Especially since the unusual interference to everyone's emotions, making everyone afraid, had also been deactivated by him. Satisfied with his progress, Lex decided to finally relax a little. He entered the hot tub room and soaked himself in the warm bubbling water for an hour to allow himself to unwind. Once he was done with that, Lex donned a cozy night suit and slipped into his bed. He fell asleep almost instantly, for he'd had very little actual rest the last few days. Outside the tavern, the state of the town was even worse. Buildings had collapsed and rubble fell from the sky like rain, crushing monsters left and right. While Pvarty could not help with the fight, there were other things he could do. Though he was no longer from the Noel family, his entire life had been spent in it, so he knew their secrets in and out. He broke into the formation chamber underground and forcefully served the connection of the formation with its control crystal and reconnected it to a new one. He searched the town for signs of life, and was elated to discover that a good number of citizens had survived by hiding in underground bunkers. What he didn't know was that this was not a coincidence. The murderer had created safe zones in areas with emergency survival bunkers and herded all survivors that way. He immediately began using the formation, which was the only thing unaffected by the fight happening due to it being buried so deep underground, to further secure the survivors. Well, almost the only thing, as the Midnight Tavern stood tall and proud on what was once known as Baker Street. It was the only building still standing in the vicinity, with all others having collapsed due to the aftershocks of the battle. Still, Pvarty knew none of that. Pvarty also enabled the emergency aid broadcast, alerting the Noel family to the situation here. He did not think he'd be meeting his father again so soon, but it couldn't be helped. While all this was happening, the tenants of the Midnight Tavern were playing a game invented by the tavern owner called Bingo. It was immediately a crowd favorite, and Lex even allotted a few glasses of very expensive drinks as the ultimate prize to keep the audience hooked. Around 8 hours later, Lex woke feeling completely refreshed. The first thing he did was check on the status of the system, but it still only said updating. The long duration of disconnect had made him nervous. He did not know what was happening at the inn and he wasn't used to it. Hopefully, things were all right. Fenrir growled aggressively, ready to rend the world asunder under its might. But it was futile. In the face of overwhelming strength, even the little deterrence afforded to it by its bloodline meant nothing. The galactic sovereign turtle lifted Fenrir up by its leg using a vine, and threw him into a pool of water. The dog really needed to get used to showering. Fenrir yelped and struggled, but the turtle didn't care. It liked its garden to smell nice, not like a sweaty dog. Little Blue, which had entered the Foundation realm, laughed at Fenrir's state. Its little brother, Fenrir, was far too powerful for the whale to handle or even run from anymore, so whenever it got bullied by the turtle, Little Blue would enjoy it endlessly. Unfortunately, its fun times were about to end. Under the orders of Mary, Little Blue was about to start its first job. Lex had once instructed them to plan out a play area for kids and, after extensive research, it was discovered that Little Blue had a natural instinct when it came to effectively communicating with kids, regardless of its species. Although Mary could not contact Lex at the moment, she could not let anyone know. So, unofficially, work was still in progress on all his projects. But, soon, things would spiral even out of Mary's hands. That was because the final for the Lady Cosmos competition was coming up, and more than one complication had arisen. Things were under control so far, mainly because of Lex's thorough preparation, but she could not guess how long it would last. Up on Midnight Mountain, the dragon no longer slept and was instead watching the inn intently. A fight had broken out just a day ago when a rather powerful cohort appeared, claiming that one of the finalists in the competition was their slave and that the inn needed to hand her over. The dragon had to personally make a move to prevent the situation from going downhill quickly, for no one else at the inn, even Kawain, could handle them. More importantly, there was a notorious playboy whose reputation had been spread across the galaxy who had been attracted to the inn, and a fight between him and Harry Styles had nearly broken out, and he wasn't the only one who nearly fought with him. The situation was incredibly tense, and everyone was awaiting the finals to see if any drama would occur. Chapter 365 Dragon's Wake. Unable to check up on the inn, Lex decided to have some breakfast before going up onto the roof and investigating the state of the town. Once he confirmed everything was all right, he would go and alert the necessary people about the changes. Since Lex hadn't really been following a fixed schedule when he slept, it was well into the night when he awoke, meaning most of the guests were asleep. The few who were awake sat in silence, mostly by themselves, or whispered to someone nearby. Lex paid them no mind and got himself some leftovers, heated them up and enjoyed his meal. Feeling good at his recent accomplishment, he decided to pair his breakfast with a 10,000 MP glass of warm malt. Taking his time, Lex began to think about what to do during the next few days. It was unknown when the system would finish updating, and he was limited to the tavern building, so the most he could honestly do is cultivate. He was also thinking of how to keep the tavern guests occupied. Bingo had been a great success, so his next plan was karaoke night, but he was not familiar with local songs, and did not know if there was much of a culture based on singing. Lex's musing stopped when he noticed that Rick was walking towards him. Lex was startled, for he was supposed to be controlling the space formation which, for Rick, would usually completely occupy him. "We haven't been attacked by a single monster in well over an hour," Rick explained when Lex asked. "But I had to solidify the entire space around the tavern, preventing anyone from coming in or out, because the tavern seemed to be suffering from some kind of long-range attack." Treating the matter extremely seriously, Lex took back control of the formation and quickly climbed up to the roof. Yet when he expected to see a brightly lit yet monster-filled town, all he saw was a war zone. The wooden tavern building was the only structure still standing as far as the eye could see, and stood out like a sore thumb. Everything else, every building, every wall, every statue, every monument had been reduced to rubble under the might of an epic battle. In the air, a man battled ferociously with a massive monster that looked like it came out of Godzilla's nightmare. Each gust of wind released from their clash blew fiercer than a hurricane, and carried with it massive boulders like flakes of snow in a winter storm. The town's formation, despite the state of what could no longer be called a town, seemed to be active and running, for the battleground was well lit, and it seemed to restrict the monster somewhat. With each clash, the human would release a roar that would put thunder to shame, his fists carrying might that made lightning seem like mere static, yet the monster remained unperturbed. In fact, the monster was not even paying full attention to the man. From time to time, it would try to attack the ground, as if looking for some buried treasure. The man, who looked more like a single flea in front of the creature, however, managed to block each and every one of its attacks. Lex gulped as his brain finally managed to process the clash straight out of science fiction that was actually taking place before him. It would be fair to say that, at the moment, Lex was at his most vulnerable. He did not have access to the system right now and could not make additions to the formations, or use some other method to help him out from this predicament should the battle divert towards the tavern. He should have felt fear. Instead, his gaze was focused yet calm. He put on this thinking cap to put him in the artificial state of flow so that he would not make a mistake or miss out on something important. While he could not make any last-minute additions to the tavern using the system, he was not unprepared. From the moment his gut gave him the unusual warning from earlier, he made plenty of additions. While he still lacked a means of attack, as ever, he had more than one formation to protect himself. In fact, as absurd and crazy as it may seem, Lex spent 780 million MP just on adding different formations to the tavern to increase its protection. It may seem like an absurd amount, but there was no amount of MP Lex wasn't willing to spend for his own protection. But even though he was willing to spend MP, the reason he ended up spending so much was because he did not know what kind of trouble to anticipate. He had to add various formations to cater to as many possibilities as he could imagine. "Zagan, this is your last warning," yelled the man, his voice sounding more irritated than angered. "Retreat. If this goes on much longer, then even if it means I have to stop holding back, I'll make you regret it." Lex was startled to learn that the state of the town was a result of a battle where the participants were still holding back. He didn't know what had caused the battle, but he really hoped the monster would be deterred. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The monster only increased its pace of attack, bombarding the humans and the ground with pulses of energy. The human tried, but he was not fast enough to block all attacks, causing them to create massive craters in the ground. The lights produced by the formation flickered as the formation was finally being threatened, though it still seemed to be holding on. "Mr. Innkeeper," whispered a familiar voice in Lex's mind. "I sensed something really, really wonderful underground for a moment. If you can find it and eat it, I think it would be very delicious. Even I'm feeling a little hungry after sensing it." Lex was startled, but quickly made the connection. Indeed, there was some kind of treasure hidden here, and the formation's real purpose was to hide its aura. Well, Lex couldn't be completely certain of this fact, but it seemed completely plausible to him that someone would build a town here so that the addition of such a massive formation wouldn't be questioned, and it could continue to hide the prescience of whatever treasure was here. But the monster's attacks seemed to be threatening the integrity of the formation, causing it to leak the aura of whatever it hid. The world seed lotus on Lex's back wasn't the only one to notice the aura. The monster had as well, and its eyes lit up as it began to concentrate its attacks. But the human was no pushover. True to his earlier threats, he had stopped holding back, and instead of blocking the monster, he now focused on attacking. Cracks seemed to appear in the sky itself whenever he attacked, and the monster was finally forced to take things seriously. It stopped attacking the floor and instead defended itself. The speed of their fight soon exceeded what Lex could comprehend, and all he could witness was the continuous aftermath of the battle. Before things reached their crescendo, 2 more humans seemed to arrive from a distance and immediately joined the battle. Lex had no idea who they were, but they were definitely also extremely powerful. The fight, still beyond his comprehension, only seemed to be getting more intense with the addition of the new participants. There was no indication that they were close to defeating, or even intimidating the monster. Moreover, the cracks left behind in the sky from the various clashes seemed to be increasing, and Lex could feel an acute threat from them. It was best to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. He thought for a moment which one of his formations would be most helpful, for no matter which one he used, he could not directly defeat the monster, only fool or intimidate it. There was a gentle shift in Lex's expression as he shifted into his innkeeper persona, exuding innate confidence even in the face of the most powerful guest. He activated the formation called Dragon's Wake, a formation that had cost him 180 million MP and performed only one function. It acutely replicated the dragon's aura that was released by the dragon back at the inn, though in greater intensity even if only for a short moment. The aura spread from the lonely tavern building and, in the blink of an eye, covered the entire battlefield. Zagan, the crown prince, Bertram Noel and his father, both of whom had just arrived, were washed in the feeling of being eyed by a predator. Their hearts froze as an inborn terror filled them, and in their heads they all saw the image of a single reptilian eye quivering just a little. It was as if a dragon was on the verge of waking up. Chapter 366, Flood of Colors. The aura disappeared just as fast as it appeared. It was but a single moment of pure suppression, but it had completely stopped the flow of battle. Each participant eyed each other warily, as if to determine if the others knew the origin of the aura, yet they were all equally surprised. Lex considered making a statement. A simple one-liner to let them know that he was displeased or that he would let the matter stay so long as they ended their battle. but the move didn't feel right. As the innkeeper, if he gave excessive explanations while in the inn, it would still make sense since he had to provide an explanation to his guests. Outside, however, he did not need to explain. Since he was playing the role of a powerhouse, no matter how down-to-earth he made his personality seem, some things would be beneath him. In such a situation, the fact that he supposedly flashed his aura at them was already enough of a warning. Giving further explanations would make him seem weak. So, with arms folded across his chest and an impassive face, he just looked up in the air and watched everything. Whether or not the battle continued would determine his follow-up. In fact, he was already preparing for the battle to continue. After all, while he was using the mindset of a powerful overlord to judge the situation, he had to live in the reality where he was pathetically weak in front of those up in the sky. A single second went by since the aura disappeared. For Lex it was a minuscule amount of time, barely enough to form a couple of thoughts, but for the immortals in the sky, a single second was akin to a lifetime. The speed at which their minds worked was not comprehensible to mere mortals, and so, a single second of indecision was actually an immense deal. It showed just how much of a deterrent that aura had been. Zagan understood that the target of the aura had been him all along, since he was the one who came here and started making trouble. Since whoever released the aura marked this place as his territory, he surely had an understanding with the humans. The only question that remained was if he was willing to risk fighting whoever released the aura for the treasure. After all, it need not be explained that for a being of such level to reside here, the only attraction was whatever that treasure had been. Zagan was confident in his own strength, but if he had to fight the owner of that aura, alongside these humans, it would be a little difficult. Zagan hated things that were difficult, for he was somewhat lazy by nature. Letting out an irritated groan, Zagan turned around and returned to the watery depths. The immediate threat of the beast was gone, but the humans remained frozen in the air. This was because they did not understand where the aura had come from. Was there some ancient monster sleeping in the area from long before they ever even arrived? It seemed like it. Yet even as they waited, nothing happened. No monster arrived. There was no follow-up. When they were convinced that all was well, Bertram and Joseph Noel, the patriarch of the Noel family, finally turned their attention to the battlefield that had once been Babylon. Bertram was especially hit hard by the town's current state because he had visited it so recently. It was hard to believe that there would be a single survivor. Then they turned to look at the Midnight Tavern. Amidst the broken land, filled with monster corpses, and the burnt-up remnants of what might have once been houses, a single, 3-story wooden building stood pristine. The small garden at the front had the sheen of freshly cut grass, but other than that, it did not seem like it had even suffered from strong winds. They even noticed that, by a particular windowsill, a robin had made a small nest. It was safely nestled on top of its tiny eggs, asleep without fear or concern of the carnage that had struck the lands. It was too peculiar. If there was any chance of survivors, it would be there. Suddenly, Bertram was struck by a memory of a visit on his passage through the town. Midnight Tavern. He mumbled, softly remembering the place where his brother had last partied. But, before he even had the time to reminisce, a hole was blown open in the ground, and party emerged. "There are survivors," he yelled up into the sky, uncaring that his family would treat him as a stranger. "But the entrances have been buried, and the formation isn't working properly, it's been too badly damaged." The family that did not expect a reunion so soon quickly began excavating an entrance to the underground bunkers. Finding survivors would help them understand what exactly had happened here, and what exactly that one building was. Back inside the tavern, Lex descended from the rooftop in a jolly mood and clapped his hands loudly to attract everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have excellent news," Lex said slightly formally, forgetting to step out of his innkeeper persona. "The town's formation has returned to functioning normally, and all the monsters outside have been taken care of. For safety reasons, I suggest you still stay indoors for a bit longer, but someone should be visiting us soon to let us know it's safe outside." The crowded tavern was frozen still, unsure if they believed what they were hearing. The problem had been resolved? That was easier than it should have been, right? Though they were crowded, they were never hungry or bored. They realized long ago that some kind of illusion had been cast on the windows, for they could never see a single monster outside. Even now, things seemed exactly the same if they looked outside. But the tavern owner had no reason to lie to them, for this was a lie easily exposed. That must mean it was true. Cheers erupted all together, and even those who weren't in the hall quickly found out what happened. The kids especially were the happiest, and some started crying. It had been too long that they had been away from their parents, and they were too afraid to even think of what had happened to them. In the jubilation and merrymaking, no one besides Lex noticed that the front door softly opened and a single man stepped in. He was holding, in his hand, a remarkably familiar-looking plastic fork, and he was looking directly towards Lex. The two exchanged glances before the man turned towards the bar and, after hesitating for a moment, went and sat down. Lex went and sat beside him. "What can I get you?" Roan, the barkeep, asked. "The strongest drink you have," the man answered. "The strongest? You sure? It's expensive." Yeah, I can afford it," he said casually. Roan looked at Lex, who only nodded, before he retreated towards the kitchen. He had to go to the wine cellar to bring out the truly expensive drinks. There was silence between the man and Lex, as neither said anything first. A few minutes later, Roan returned holding a small jade bottle sealed by a cork. After showing the man the bottle, and clearly stating the price just to be sure, he poured him a drink. This single bottle had been worth 1 million MP and held only 2 servings worth of spirit. Which meant the drink the man was having was 500,000 MP in value. When he heard the price, the man almost thought he was being ripped off, but when the bottle was opened, the man went into shock. The plastic fork dropped from his hand and his attention was solely focused on the small white bowl in which the drink was poured. A milky white drink with chilled fog hovering around it appeared in his eyes, and became the only thing in his world. As the drink poured from the bottle, he observed its flow like he was watching the most beautiful woman in the world. When the bowl was ready, the man reached forward with shaking hands, but when he held the cup his hands became steady. In his world, silence descended as he brought the cup near his face and took a deep sniff. Even with eyes closed, the man saw an explosion of colors in his mind. Waves of red clashed with yellow and green, forming a tempest of raging beauty. The colors changed form and became a river flowing from the highest peak, filled with fish swimming up and down the stream. Birds chirped as they flew over the river and rainbows bloomed. Grass spurred from the ground along with the most fragrant of flowers. The man was lost in his own world, for he had gotten drunk just from the smell, the cup still full in front of his nose. Chapter 367 Tears. The Crown Prince of Hum had lost himself in the intoxicating smell of his drink, his world now a clash of vibrant visuals and obscure concepts. He seemed to have lost himself in the world where grass grew in moments and life flourished in rivers of milk, where honey dripped from trees and the concepts of beauty and peace merged together to form angels with the sole purpose of giving him their love. The blue skies were filled with soul birds, dancing in the distance. Fairies formed communities in trees, and the wind carried within it the sound of laughter always. It was heaven, for the world was perfect, and it was hell, because it was forever out of reach. His eyes still shut, the Crown Prince moved the cup to his lips and took a single sip. As refreshing as the morning dew, the spirit sat in his mouth, refreshing all of his senses. He savored the soft flavor for a while, but he finally drank. The heaven that had filled his mind now enveloped his body, but not as strongly as it had captured his mind. It was like a tingle on the back of his neck, like a teasing wink of a lover just out of reach. Unable to stop himself, the prince downed the whole cup in one go and let the sensation fill him. It was like the embrace he had longed for, the warmth of a hug he never knew he needed. He felt everything that was broken inside of himself, and then he felt a gentle hand run through his hair, playing with his curls. He heard a whisper no one would heal the injuries in his heart for him, but there was no rush for him to heal either. He could be weak, for as long as he needed, until he had the strength to heal himself. Lex did not know what was happening inside the man's mind. He was simply curious as to the man's mission. He could guess much, simply based on the fork that he recognized. That was not to say that he believed the fork was extremely unique or completely unavailable on the market. It was more of the fact that the chances of him running into a mysterious stranger who was incredibly powerful and happened to be walking around with a fork that was identical to his. He was more inclined to believe that the man had used it to somehow track Lex down. When Lex had left the Hum Nation, he did not actually know what danger he had been avoiding. He was blissfully unaware that the king himself had made an appearance in search of him, and wanted to procure his cultivation technique. He was also ignorant of everything that had happened after. It was for this reason he did not immediately make the connection between the man and the king himself. His first thought was that the crazy Professor Vernon had sent someone to track him down. He was patiently waiting for the man to finish enjoying his drink, but was taken aback when the man suddenly started bawling his eyes out. One moment he was fine, and the next tears were streaming down his eyes like a waterfall and he was wailing like a baby. His face had turned completely red, and he had completely lost all control of himself. Others, who were celebrating, and were caught in the emotional tempest that the announcement of the end of their self-imposed imprisonment in the tavern was ending, saw the man crying and began crying as well. The triplets themselves were too anxious to work, so Roan and Rick were passing out drinks the fastest they were able to, and the presence of the drinks made everyone even more vulnerable to the fluctuating emotions. The doors to the tavern opened and Joseph and Bertram Noel stepped in, ready to encounter a life-and-death battle, only to encounter the scene of hundreds of men and women drinking and crying. They were frozen still, unsure of what to say or do, when an annoyingly familiar voice sounded out from behind them. "Drinks all around, barkeep. The Noel family will foot the bill today." Farty, who no longer had any responsibility towards helping his family out, strutted into the tavern and ordered a dim melon juice. He had forgotten the name of everything, but he did not forget the name of his new favorite drink. The crowd did not cheer as he expected, but he could not be bothered as he crossed his family and made his way to the bar. He found Aegis, who he had spent some time with already, wailing away. Slightly creeped out, Farty decided to ignore the man for the moment and just drank on his own. Lex, upon noticing the arrival of Bertram, dissolved the illusion formation around the tavern. Even if his guests saw the mayhem that had occurred, there were others who would deal with it. But before he could go greet the man himself, the mayor quickly arrived in front of the duo and began whispering something to them. Lex decided to let them have their privacy and kept their distance for the meantime. Soon, the crowd began to notice the situation outside the tavern and were struck by horror and disbelief. What was happening? Where was Babylon? Had they teleported somewhere? Too afraid to exit the building, they gathered by the door and windows and looked outside as a hush fell over the tavern, with only Aegis still crying loudly. But the mayor was an accomplished man. He did not let chaos descend, and quickly conscripted most into his rescue party. He had sent a large number of soldiers to gather the town's citizens and lead them towards underground bunkers. The bunkers had now been buried by the rubble, and needed to be excavated. The truth was, this was something that could have been easily achieved if he did it himself, but the people could not be allowed time to wallow. They had to work, and helping to save people would give them some hope in this situation where they had been struck by despair. Soon, the tavern was relatively empty once again. Many of the children had to be put to sleep because they became hysterical upon seeing the destruction, but some, like Roland, managed to keep themselves from acting out. As he watched everyone leave, the triplets along with the baker and his wife included, Lex had a heavy heart. He was not sure how many survivors there were, but he'd venture that most of those who went out had lost someone. Even the formerly spoiled workers at his tavern went out to search, doing their best to keep themselves from trembling as they saw the destruction. Soon, only the now drunk Farty, Aegis, Bertram and Joseph were left in the hall. Lex exchanged a look with the two who still stood at the entrance, shrugged, and went to the bar as well and poured himself a drink. He could not decide what was the best explanation to give as to how his tavern remained unharmed, but decided to be as vague as humanly possible about it. Upon noticing that Lex was making no moves to approach them, Bertram stepped forward and ordered a glass of sunset wine. "We meet again," he said as he swung the wine in his glass, making no actual move to drink it again. "So we do," replied Lex, as if there was nothing unusual going on at all. "Your tavern has made quite the impression on me," Bertram said, slowly introducing the topic. "Thank you, though I must say, the neighborhood isn't as safe as advertised when I bought the property." Bertram smiled weakly. It seemed the tavern owner was taking a dig at him. He readied himself to broach the topic directly, since if Lex hadn't shown any hostility so far, there was no reason to believe there was any. Yet, as luck would have it, at that exact moment, the midnight system finished updating. Along with a mental notification beep that only Lex could hear, a sort of spatial tremor released itself from Lex's body, startling Bertram and his father. The tremor did not travel far, only till the boundary of the tavern building, but that was more than enough to give the two much to speculate on. Lex, who was also taken by surprise, felt an immense change overtake him. Moreover, the system kept giving him multiple notifications, drowning his mind with the repeated beeps. "Excuse me for a moment," Lex could not help but say to Bertram. "I have a small matter to take care of. Please make yourself comfortable, I'll be back shortly." Though he said he was back, the Noel family had already received the answer they were looking for. Lex was some kind of hidden expert, and a powerful one. But, he seemed to not want to get involved in others' matters, which is why the tremor only went as far as the tavern premises. It was a silent way of letting them know that whatever happened outside the boundary of his tavern was none of his business. In truth, they were forming their own explanation for what had been a coincidence. Or rather, a lucky coincidence. Chapter 368 Upgrade. At the moment, Lex did not care much what the Noel family was thinking because he was feeling too impatient about the upgrades to his system. The fight with the murderer had been incredibly tough, but at the same time, Lex could feel that the killer himself was too much of an amateur, and perhaps had not been using the system for long. It was unlikely Lex would ever encounter such a weak system user again. Moreover, even if he did, Lex was not a mindless killer. He could not accept randomly killing someone just to steal their system unless they provided him with a sufficient reason to get rid of them, of course. Setting all that aside for now, Lex looked towards his notifications. New notification. System upgrade complete. New system status unlocked. System, Midnight Inn. System grade, Divine, Broken SSS, B+. System owner, Lex Williams. System functionality, 12%. System self-repair time, 33,312 billion years. New notification. New features unlocked. New features include Beyond the Grave, Blend Reality, Fishing Well, Murderer. New notification. Inheritance detected. Unlocking the Inheritance Lounge. Please submit the inheritance to activate the Inheritance Lounge. New notification. Live map function unlocked. New notification. Interrealm broadcast unlocked. New notification. Murder ground unlocked. New notification. Targeted scan unlocked. New notification. Remote prescience unlocked. New quest, accelerate the system's recovery by absorbing more systems. Quest reward, 1 maximum grade level reward. Remarks, sometimes, helping yourself is the same as helping others. New quest, help your guest overcome his alcoholism. Quest time limit, 3 days. Quest reward, midnight signature brew coffee. Remarks, there is more than one way to serve a guest. New quest, recruit Zagan the Ocean King as a midnight inn valet. Quest reward, Rainbow Bridge. Remarks, good luck, bro. Lex blinked several times as he read the many notifications, as there was a lot of information to absorb. Right off the bat, his system's level was way too high compared to the murder system, so why did it appear as if that system was more proactive in directly helping its user? At least, he seemed to have abilities that Lex would have guessed came from the system because the killer himself did not seem skilled enough to learn them, especially something as complicated as teleporting at his cultivation level. He had a few guesses of his own, but he ventured that it was most likely because either their systems were of different types, or because his was apparently broken. As far as system types were concerned, Lex had too little information to make an accurate judgment. All he could venture was that his system was focused around running a business, and the killer's was directly focused on a type of action. This was why his system only gave him support in terms of helping that business, while the killer's system focused on making it easier for him to perform that action. He would need to encounter and study a few more systems to work out how the division happened or what they were based on. Then came the focus on his system's broken status. Considering the fact that his system could reach the entire universe while being broken, apparently, made it so that the system's true capabilities were genuinely beyond his comprehension. Apparently, it was only working at 12% of its maximum capabilities, which left a lot of room for Lex to imagine what kind of services it really had. As for the time required for it to heal on its own, Lex completely ignored it. He had no idea what would happen to him tomorrow, let alone 33 trillion years later. Next, his attention directly snapped to the 4 new features the system added. He didn't even need to ask Mary about them, for the system informed him of its own. Beyond the grave. If a guest enters the inn right before the moment of their death, in exchange for all their accumulated wealth, they can continue to exist at the inn as a guest in the form of a spirit. The amount of time the guest can stay as a spirit depends on the amount of wealth exchanged. Blend reality. The Midnight Inn can sometimes merge with portions of the worlds connected to the inn, allowing guests to directly enter or sometimes see into the inn. Fishing well. Guests can attempt to fish in the well. The well leads to worlds connected to the Midnight Inn, and unowned items can be fished through it. The item can be immensely precious or completely common and depends on luck. Murderer. Every time the host kills someone stronger than them outside of system grounds, the host can learn one of the victim's abilities/techniques. Just these new features were incredible, and Lex could see them becoming very popular in the future. But, a part of him could not help but feel that Beyond the Grave and Murderer were not normal features of the inn, and had instead been unlocked because the system had merged with the murder system. If this theory was true, then in the future he would be able to unlock new cool features depending on the system he merged with his own. This theory was both easy to prove and incredibly hard. It was easy because all he had to do was merge with a system, while it was hard because Lex had no idea how to look for other system users. He could spend more time pondering these matters later, but for now, his attention turned to the next unlocked room, the Inheritance Lounge. He did not need to wonder what the inheritance was, as the next feature unlocked by the system, the live map function, clearly outlined it for him. It was the bracelet that had the Lucky Sutra inside of it. That was the inheritance. Not wasting a moment, Lex picked it up and submitted it to the system, activating the Inheritance Lounge. New notification. Lucky Sovereign's inheritance detected. Malicious karma was detected. Eradicating karma and absorbing the inheritance. New inheritance, Lucky Sovereign's Lucky Sutra. The Lucky Sovereign ran out of luck one day and died in the 7-nation crystal realm. Before his death, he condensed his ties of karma into a bracelet and embedded it with his Lucky Sutra. Anyone who cultivates the Lucky Sutra would slowly be influenced by the Sovereign's karma. Once they cultivated sufficiently, due to the influence of karma, the Lucky Sovereign would be reborn in the cultivator's body. The Lucky Sutra is not a direct cultivation technique, but rather an auxiliary technique used to influence luck. One of the many ways it can be used is to allow the wielder to steal the luck of any victim he kills, activating it to save himself from bad luck at critical moments. But beware, stealing good luck inherently attracts bad luck. Notification: Inheritance Lounge can now be placed. Guests can attempt to gain the inheritance, though the chance of failure is high. The inheritance will not disappear upon being learnt, and can continue to exist in the lounge. Bloody hell! Lex thought to himself as he read the description of the inheritance. On the one hand, he suddenly understood why it was so hard to kill the killer. He had absorbed the luck of so many victims. On the other hand, he had really dodged a bullet by not trying to read the Lucky Sutra. Though, come to think of it, had he not entered his overdrive state, he would have absorbed the bracelet into his body, and then may have been forced to cultivate it. He wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened to the killer. In a way, his luck was pretty good that he chose to enter the overdrive state at that time and not later. Shuddering at the thought, he set the matter aside, for the system had taken care of it for him. He then turned his attention to the live map function. It was incredible, and, in a way, was a deeper version of his normal scan function. His scan allowed him to check the status of anyone within the system grounds, while the live map showed him everything that was happening at the inn and the tavern, and highlighted different people and items in various colors, giving him even more information. Stuff like friendly or hostile, treasure or poison, a potential and recruit or someone to be wary of were all things that the map allowed him to do. It was like the maps in video games, only more details. The only unfortunate thing was that, once again, it was only limited to the system grounds, or else he'd never have any problems avoiding trouble again. Lex then looked at the next unlocked feature and his eyes shone with excitement. The interrealm broadcast would save him a lot of trouble, and make life much, much easier for him. Most of all, Lex held out his hand and activated it. After a moment, Fenrir, the wolf he was normally able to summon from the inn to the various worlds with him, appeared in front of him. Chapter 369 I Have a Question. Fenrir had been undergoing a growth spurt, but it quickly learned that the larger it grew, the more obvious its existence became to the bossy turtle. As such, he had been trying hard to repress his growth. He was not able to do that, but by focusing so much on a specific thing, he was able to unlock a bloodline ability that let it manipulate its size. These days, it spent most of its time either the size of an ordinary dog or the size of a pup. It was unfortunate, since the larger he became, the more love the various guests would give him, which was nice. But the turtle was too scary, he had to avoid it. As for what made it scary? No matter how Fenrir displayed its bloodline repression, the turtle would remain unaffected. At least in other beasts, this was not an ordinary reaction. Even the grumpy dragon atop the mountain gave him at least a snort when he used his repression. So, when Fenrir was summoned, he appeared before Lex in the size of a pup. He was asleep, for it had exhausted itself from fighting the turtle. The change in the environment, though, immediately startled it awake. Its size immediately more than tripled as it readied itself for a fight, yet it was immediately assaulted by a familiar scent. The next moment, its eyes laid on Lex, and its body froze. It sniffed a few times to check, but Lex's scent was both familiar and yet different. Who could blame him? His body had absorbed so many metals, his scent was the least of the changes he had undergone. Yet it was neither the scent nor the familiar sight that assured them of each other's identity. It was the bond they shared that tied them together as partners. Fenrir held in excitement as it quickly leaped onto Lex, not bothering to care that in its current size it was much larger than Lex. Had this occurred before Lex's breakthrough, he would have fallen over, but now the massive size was not but a minor inconvenience. Compared to Fenrir's excitement, Lex was a lot more emotional. It had been months since he had gotten stuck at the inn, and a part of him believed that it would be years before he ever got a chance to return. He had resigned himself to being unable to meet anyone he was familiar with, and in honesty, he had made decent friends here as well. That did not change the fact that, deep down, Lex had missed the inn terribly. Somehow, he missed it even more than Earth itself. As for his family, Lex had been keeping himself from thinking about them for quite a while. Still, the joy in his heart swelled at finally seeing a familiar face. He had used a support token on Fenrir, which allowed him to summon and unsummon him from the inn to wherever he was. Unfortunately, he had been sent to the Crystal Realm, which was not another world but another realm. Due to the complexities involved in traveling from one realm to another, not only was Lex stuck behind until he gathered enough energy, he could not exchange items from the inn in the way he usually could. For example, He used to be able to buy healing items from the gift shop and use them on himself, but was no longer able to do so. Now, with the interrealm broadcast unlocked, not only was this issue resolved, it would change the nature of Lex's stay at the inn. To be specific, all the interrealm broadcast allowed the inn to do was, when required, broadcast a special signal to other realms, allowing the system to, temporarily, form a connection between the inn and that realm. This was different from how the system acted within the origin realm, which could be accessed by the system at any time all at once. But, by having a broadcast, through whatever unique method it used, the inn could maintain its normal functionality to other realms as well. There was only one drawback to this, which is that while in the origin realm, things like the golden key could instantly connect, in other realms, there would be a considerable delay. For Lex, this represented two major changes. The first was that, from now on, not only would he be able to connect other worlds, but other realms to the inn as well. This meant that the golden door that randomly opened sometimes on planets connected to the inn would now open randomly anywhere in any realm connected to the inn. The second major change this represented for Lex was his current status in the crystal realm. He had been pulled into this realm by an accident caused by an unknown anomaly, and to return he had to manually gather enough energy to allow the system to return him. He also had a quest to uncover what the anomaly was. Now, however, due to the existence of the interrealm broadcast, the energy requirement to transport him back had dropped so dramatically that the emergency protocol that gave him additional authority had been withdrawn. In a short time, he would eventually link this realm to the inn, which would allow him to return naturally. He could still, however, absorb vast amounts of pure energy to speed up the process further. His excitement at the prospect of being able to return actually managed to overshadow his feeling of grief that he no longer had the additional authority. That made many things much easier. For example, the drink that had been served to the man back at the bar who was crying was something he was only able to buy with his increased authority. He was no longer able to buy such high-level drinks. In fact, let alone drinks, even the formations he could now buy were limited to, at most, being able to affect nascent-level cultivators. But, what was done, Lex couldn't be bothered to pay attention to it. He spent a good amount of time hugging and playing with Fenrir before he turned his attention back to the system. There were still many other notifications he needed to understand. After the interrealm broadcast was the ominous-sounding murder ground. Murder ground. When on a planet linked to the inn, you can select a target and instantly teleport both the target and yourself to the murder ground. Neither can leave while the other still lives. Selecting a target requires marking them through physical touch. Additionally, the murder ground can be rented out to resolve fights and wars without disrupting the environment of the original planet. Please note, surrender is not an option when using the murder ground, as only the victor can be living to exit the murder ground. Lex did not doubt for even a single moment that the murder ground was an ability the system got from the murder system. This was exactly like what had happened between himself and the murderer, except that he was pretty sure he had been marked without physical contact. Still, this ability was too powerful and ominous, as it could teleport others away from their home ground. Moreover, the option of not allowing surrender also ensured that the battle would be bloody, with no recourse. From an environmental perspective it was good, as it would spare the planet from suffering through the trial of war and its accompanying destruction, but by leaving no survivors, it merely channeled that destruction from towards the environment to the opposing enemies. Lex continued to read the new additions. Targeted scan. The host can scan living beings outside of the system grounds. However, the amount of information received will be diminished as compared to the scan in the system grounds. He nodded, appreciating the ability. Even if it was limited, it would help him immensely. Remote prescience. You can project your image anywhere in the system grounds and interact with guests via the image. The keen observer will be able to detect that it is an image and not a real body. Lex raised an eyebrow. This was a good ability, especially since he did not intend to stay at the tavern once the inn was also unlocked. Whether he was at the inn or the tavern, he could use his remote prescience to handle matters personally. Next, he turned his attention to the quests. Whether he was required or not, he more or less intended to help the system recover, though he wondered greatly about how the system was damaged in the first place. Based on the knowledge that others also had systems, Lex could conclude that there was a great possibility that someone had the system before him. Suddenly, he froze, and a few things clicked in his mind. He might not have been the first person to use this system. "Mary," he said suddenly, his voice very even. "I have a question for you." Chapter 370 Greatest Weakness. "Yes?" Mary asked, unaware of what was going on in Lex's mind. She had become aware of when the connection was restored and was waiting for Lex to finish up his business before she began briefing him on the situation at the inn. Things really were getting bad. "I know you're probably going to tell me your authority isn't enough, but did the Midnight System have an owner before me?" There was a moment of silence as Mary did not answer immediately. He did not know if she was hesitating, or investigating the truth for herself, or checking her authority, but the silence itself was very telling. Regardless of what she said, Lex had made a conclusion on his own. "The last time we had a conversation about systems, I told you that you should become much stronger before you learn about these things. But, since you have already encountered another system user, it is imperative for you to learn as much as possible about other systems lest you are caught unprepared. Since you also have a quest relating to absorbing more systems, your authority and rights to sensitive information in this regard has been adjusted. I will share with you what you can know. First of all, a system exists in the form of an item. It is currently residing in your soul, and not inside your body, but from the moment you gained the Midnight System, the system has been operating through that item as its core. When you reach that nascent realm, the system will successfully merge with your soul. At that point, both you and the system will experience a minor overhaul. You will have a great increase in authority, and the system will have a much easier time operating." Mary paused again, distress painting her holographic image. "As you have guessed, this is not the first time your system has had an owner. Such is the case for most systems in the universe, for they have existed for a very long time already. When one owner dies, the system continues to exist and simply changes its owner. But, and this is the most important part, no two systems are completely identical. They may be extremely similar, but they will never be the same. At least, so far it has been like this. This is because, when a system changes owners, only the grade of the system remains the same, not how the system operates. So, your system, when it had a previous owner, did not exist as the Midnight Inn, or even a hotel of any sort at all. The only thing that has remained is the grade, though due to severe damage, while the grade remains, the functionality of your system has dropped immensely." Lex was honestly not expecting to receive an answer, but now that he did, it left him feeling kind of hollow. The user dies, but the system remains. So maybe, there really isn't something special about him that the system wants. Maybe it's just riding in his body until he dies, and it moves on to another host. "Did you know the previous host?" Lex asked soberly. "My memories began the moment you absorbed the system," Mary answered succinctly. After another brief pause, Mary continued. "While systems have great abilities, they are not omnipotent. Strong beings and cultivators can easily detect the prescience of soul treasures in lower-level cultivators, and if their attention is focused on you they will easily be able to detect the system. The only reason you've avoided this, so far, is because each time you met an overwhelmingly powerful cultivator, it was in the system grounds, where the system has the most ability to hide itself. But, that is not the only way to detect a system. Depending on the grade of the system, the way in which it interacts with the universe at large is different. For lower-grade systems, there are many ways to detect its interference if one is looking for it. For you this, at least, is not a concern because even while your system's functionality has been lowered, the level it is operating at has already transcended the letter grading system. Can a system's grade be raised? Lex asked, his interest piqued. All systems began at the E- grade, Mary answered. If its grade is higher, then it's because its owner, or previous owner has raised it himself. For you, this is irrelevant, because the level of your system is too high compared to yourself. The chances of you encountering something that can help you raise your system's level is too low. Of course, you can also raise your system's level by absorbing other systems. But you already had so much trouble facing the murder system, a grade D system. Trying to absorb higher-level systems is something you should completely forget about for now. Mary paused again, as if thinking about something, then said, "You will gain more authority regarding systems when you reach the immortal level. If you want to learn anything else about systems before then, you will have to figure it out on your own." Lex took in a moment to absorb all the information he received, his hand mindlessly running over Fenrir's thick coat. He could not even imagine how strong the previous owner of his system must have been for it to reach the Destiny realm. Yet, he died all the same. Moreover, considering the system's damaged condition, there was a real possibility that the death wasn't pleasant or peaceful. Of course, there could be other explanations, but he put it out of his mind for now. Any tips on how to identify other system users? Lex asked. He hadn't had much time to consider this, but he had been wondering if he had run into any other system users while running the inn. Considering the kind of business model it was, even if he hadn't yet, there was a good chance that he would in the future. A system's greatest weakness is another system, is all Mary replied. Chapter 371 Merciless Onslaught. What is that supposed to mean? Lex asked. A system's greatest weakness was another system. So was his system supposed to help him out in looking for other system users? That is all I can say, Mary said, shaking her head. Lex mused on everything he had learned today, and thought about things he needed to do in the future. One very important thing to take note of was that if he was outside the inn or tavern, the prescience of a treasure within his soul might become perceivable. While the system could hide itself, as it had once done when he encountered Loretta's dad, Lex needed to take a more active role in its protection. If he was on the lookout for more systems, there would be others as well. He didn't want to spend too much time thinking about these things, for he hadn't forgotten that he had guests waiting for him. What's the update on the inn? Lex finally asked. Did I miss anything important? Many things, Mary replied in an exhausted tone. The Lady Cosmos is nearing its end. Only 2 contenders remain, but a few days ago an incredibly strong cultivator arrived claiming that one of them was her slave and that we should return her immediately. The dragon managed to subdue him, and the security team managed to kick him out of the inn, but now the contestant is too afraid to go on. She is very concerned that, once the competition ends, and she returns to her planet, someone will show up to turn her into a slave. Lex narrowed his eyes. He truly had no solution for what someone might do outside of the inn. Tell me about her, Lex said. Her name is Jill. She is a fox from Nibiru that underwent an evolution and became able to convert into a human. She claims that she has lived her whole life on Nibiru and has always been free. The person who claims to be her owner is from a species known as Galati, and was very strong. Even Kawain was unable to deal with him, and only the dragon's assistants resolved the situation. Well, what's the issue, then? If he's not her master, then there's no way he'll be able to locate her or her planet. I believe everyone was very carefully informed not to share personal information during the show. She did not reveal anything, but someone from Nibiru recognized her and spread her information. Although the person hunting her may never be able to find her planet, she is extremely afraid of returning. He was just that strong. She's been completely crippled with fear. Even if that Galati can't find her, she's too afraid of being found by others. Lex nodded and said, I'll create a new room, called the hot tub room. Send her there to relax and relieve the stress on her mind first. Afterwards, send her to Harry and have him help her out in removing the excess fear that has taken hold of her mind. In the meantime, we'll think of solutions. In fact, send me her details. If she's skilled and has a good personality, we can hire her as a staff member and then she can live here. That'll solve her problem. Mary nodded and said, since you brought up Harry, there's also a matter concerning him. He's been asking me to find out, if he gets married, can his wife live at the inn with him as well? Lex was genuinely startled by the question. Harry was 17 years old, or maybe he was 18 now. Either way, he was extremely young. Why was he thinking of getting married? Not waiting for Lex to ask, Mary explained how Harry and quickly developed a relationship with one of the contestants for Lady Cosmos. Though she did not win, she had made it to the top 5. Once the competition was over for her, she and Harry had spent so much time together and had developed feelings quickly. As abrupt as it seemed, both wanted nothing more than to get married at once, hence the question. After all, without the inn, they both lived on different planets and would not be able to have a life together. Lex, of course, knew a bit about what was going on between Harry and Haley, but this was a little too much. Still, he was happy for them, and allowed them to live at the inn together once they got married. After all, Harry already had a room at the inn. Next were a few other miscellaneous problems, including the children's area Lex requested. At the time, he had allocated a massive empty plot of land at the inn and wanted to turn it into some kind of childcare/festival type area, where parents or guardians could temporarily drop off their kids. The design was ready and, after getting Lex's approval, he spent 2 million MP to make it happen. It wasn't too elaborate since it was targeted towards kids. It was mostly just colorful and full of play areas that were child-friendly. While Lex was receiving a report of the inn's situation, at the inn, near the area where the kids' area was designed, 2 kids were riding peacocks across the lawn. The peacocks, which had lived at the inn for nearly a year, had naturally been nurtured by the turtle and had grown powerful enough to support the weight of fully grown men, let alone 2 children. "Princess Layla, new territory straight ahead," said the boy, looking through a pocket telescope at the new structure that was plainly visible to the naked eye. "Well then, Deputy Commander Captain Jimmy, full speed ahead. Peacock warriors, we will conquer all these lands." As if to answer her declaration, a few other children riding peacocks appeared on the horizon. The battle for the playground was nigh, but would the staff of the Midnight Inn be able to handle the merciless onslaught that awaited them? Chapter 372 Time to Hunt. The Midnight Inn daycare service, which had existed for an entire 3 minutes 21 seconds, fell under the siege of the peacock warriors. Astride their viscous mounts, they leaped over the padded, child-proof boundary walls and right into the children's zone. Some landed in the hedge maze, filled with ripe, delicious fruit ready to be plucked and eaten. Others who leaped over the walls landed in the ball pool, or rather, in the sea of colorful plastic balls. Others still landed in houses made entirely of trampoline-like surfaces, while some landed on the jungle gym that stood above a massive pool. Delicious candy was stashed like treasure in the center of the jungle for all to see, but the path to it was perilous. "Princess Layla, the enemy has laid booby traps," Jimmy said, his eyes affixed on the jiggliest plate of jelly ever known to man, hidden in the center of a mirror maze. "The peacock warriors know no fear," she replied gallantly. "Forward march. The land shall know our might." But before the march could even begin, the rabbits from Bunny Nation appeared one by one, confused. They had been hired as caretakers at the daycare, but no one had come to drop off any children, so where had these little ones popped out from? Unfortunately, no one would answer them. The bunnies barely had any training on how to deal with kids, so they began hopping around trying to calm them down. Unfortunately, they only made themselves easy targets for the peacock warriors. Like this, the first of the great peacock bunny skirmishes began. Lex, woefully unaware of the plight of his workers, dismissed Mary and finally returned to the main hall of the tavern. Having regained control of the system, not to mention having attained great upgrades and benefits, Lex's mood was noticeably better when he returned to the Noel family. The man on the bar was still crying with his head covered by a towel that Rick threw his way. Bertram and the other man were also sitting at the bar, casually sipping on a hot beverage as they waited for Lex to return. Although the town needed their help and supervision, there was no longer any emergency, so they could take their time. After all monsters were dead and the people who were trapped underground were only trapped and not harmed, probably. Even if they were, understanding the truth behind not only the tavern, but possibly even that mysterious aura from earlier took precedence. After all, it would be too much of a coincidence for a tavern capable of surviving Zagan's attacks to appear at the same time as an unknown, powerful entity they had never discovered in the region before. Even if it was not hostile towards them, they could not simply ignore it. After all, this was their territory, and they had plenty of secrets to hide. Even if they had no conflict now didn't mean there wouldn't be a conflict in the future if their secrets were revealed. Please excuse my behavior from earlier. There was a matter that required my attention, said Lex as he walked up to Bertram. Considering all that's happened here recently, it's completely understandable if there are a few fires to put out here and there, Bertram replied. Allow me to introduce you. This is my father, Joseph Noel, Lord of this territory. It's an honor to meet you, Lex said politely, though he only gave a slight nod instead of an elaborate bow as one might do before such an important person. It was already too late for him to start pretending to be ordinary, so there was no point in him being too deferential now. Your establishment provides surprisingly good service, Joseph said, as he raised his mug a bit. I'm surprised you opened up in such a small town rather than one of the big cities. Small towns have their own rustic charm, Lex replied. Besides, I was not really in the mood for too much hustle and bustle. A simple tavern in a simple town is enough for me. A simple tavern? Joseph repeated with an amused tone. Indeed, in a simple town, Lex replied, looking the man in the eye. By the way, I have something for you. From his pocket, Lex took out a stack of papers and presented it to the man. Not to be rude or anything, but I'm assuming as the lord of the territory, you'll take care of the lodging and food expenses for all the survivors during this period. The papers were an itemized bill for all the services he had provided during this time, to all the people who had crammed themselves at the tavern. At first, in the name of humanity, Lex decided not to charge them since it was an emergency situation. But since the lord of the territory was here, there wasn't any reason for him to continue to bear the cost. After all, he was running a business, not a charity. Joseph struggled to keep his face straight as he received the bill and handed it to his son without even looking at it. Of course we'll take care of it, Joseph answered. Though speaking of taking care of survivors during an emergency, it's quite impressive that your tavern was able to survive Zagan's destruction. It was time. Lex had to give some kind of answer, no matter how vague. Very fortunate, I think, said Lex. It was due to a protective formation left behind by a friend of mine who was very concerned for my health. God bless such friends, Joseph replied, though it was unknown whether he believed the story. Is your friend still around? With skill like his, even I wouldn't mind paying for his services to build a formation or two. After all, danger is around every corner in these parts. Even Zagan, the Ocean King, himself was scared away by the aura of another powerful being nearby. Even I was startled by it, yet I noticed none of the survivors who escaped your tavern even felt the aura. Such protection truly is remarkable. My friend already left a while ago, though I'll thank you on his behalf for complimenting his skill. I'm not sure what aura you're talking about, since I didn't feel it either, but maybe you should check underground. There have been a number of strange auras coming from underground lately. The words spoken were all polite, but the subtle testing and probing by the Lord were all deflected by Lex. When Joseph hinted that Lex might know or have something to do with the aura that scared away Zagan, or that it might even belong to his mysterious friend, Lex replied by letting him know that he had no intentions of revealing anything, and that if questions needed to be asked, there were a few he could ask himself about what was happening under the town. After all, even the lotus on his back had been attracted to the aura that had been revealed earlier. Whatever was hidden down there was truly something unimaginably precious. Maybe, just maybe, the whole reason the town was formed here in the first place was to use a protection formation as a guise for a much more elaborate formation, the true purpose of which was to hide the treasures underneath. There was a moment of silence after which Joseph was about to reply to Lex when the weeping man beside them quickly got up. He removed the towel over his head and looked at Lex with eyes filled with red streaks. I want more, he said hoarsely. It had been a long time since he had been as splendidly drunk as what he had just experienced. Unfortunately, the effects of the drink, while splendid, did not last a long time. With his cultivation level, he could barely remain drunk for an hour. As an addict, he was naturally desperate to drink it again. Yet Lex did not forget his latest quest. He had to help the man overcome his alcoholism, and he had to do it in 3 days. This would not be easy, but Lex would definitely try. In fact, he already had 2 plans in mind on how to tackle the problem. The first was a complex plan that hinged on the man's own willingness to cooperate. The second was to turn him from an alcoholic into a druggie. It was not the most moral solution, but with only 3 days, he had to be a little creative. "I'm sorry, but I only have 1 more serving of the drink left, and the price of the drink has changed." "It doesn't matter. No matter what the price is, I can pay it." "It's not a matter of money," said Lex as he said goodbye to the 500,000 MP he would get from selling it. "You have to do a few things for me. Let's start with this." Lex let out a low whistle, summoning Fenrir from the kitchen wagging its tail. "Take him out of the town and help him hunt the monsters for a bit. He's never had such an opportunity, so it's the best time to practice. Of course, you can't let it get hurt." Honestly, since Fenrir's original role was supposed to be a protector of the inn, it was about time it started training a little on how to hunt. Chapter 373 Impressive Pup. Bertram, Joseph and the drunk all looked at Fenrir with curiosity. Although only a very short time had passed since they arrived. Bertram and Joseph at least had gotten a full debriefing of everything that happened during this period and had paid special attention to everything relating to the tavern. There had been no mention of a pet dog whatsoever, and in a building as cramped as this had been, it was impossible to hide such an animal. After all, even if the animal itself was hidden, any sound it made would still be heard by the various guests. The drunk, instead, looked at Fenrir like a man parched in the desert, finding a glass of water before him. By instinct, without even realizing that it would be inappropriate, all 3 immortals scanned the dog with their spiritual senses. It had been a split second only before they snapped out of it, and recalled that Lex may find the gesture rude. Yet that split second was more than enough to give them an overwhelming amount of information. First of all, even under the pressure of 3 immortals, Fenrir did not flinch. He continued to wag his tail and stroll towards Lex. He had entered a whole new world full of new energies and new smells and, best of all, no scary turtle to give it baths. He was incredibly happy. The fact that he had returned to Lex also greatly improved its mood. Just his amazing resilience to their aura was enough to alarm them, but then what their scan revealed was even more amazing. A simple scan was not enough to reveal to them the secrets of Fenrir's bloodline, but it was enough to let them know that Fenrir was of an astounding pedigree. So much so that Joseph and Bertram came to a tacit understanding that the beast that had revealed its aura earlier had been related to this dog here in some way. Now they were certain that Lex himself was a powerful person, hiding his identity for some reason, and had an even stronger entity hiding in the tavern. They did not do something as immature or juvenile as blaming or judging Lex, despite his immense strength, for not helping out the town instead of sticking to his tavern. The strong did not need to give an explanation for what they did, and it was not their responsibility to begin with. In fact, saving as many as he did, and even going so far as only charging Joseph something as paltry as money for his service, already spoke of Lex's immense magnanimity. All these thoughts went through the immortals' heads in merely the first second of Fenrir's arrival, and though Lex noticed something, he did not comment on it. "Of course, if you remove all danger, then it won't count as proper training," continued Lex. "Let him battle on his own, but if the situation gets too dangerous, you can help him out. A few scrapes here and there won't be a big deal either." "Understood," said the drunk as he accepted the task. Lex was not worried that he would end up not doing his task properly and let Fenrir get hurt. First of all, Lex had seen how he fought Zagan. Despite his drunken appearance, the man was a legitimate powerhouse. Secondly, with his connection to Fenrir, he would always know if Fenrir got hurt, and could summon him right back to himself in case of an emergency. Still, as a precaution, Lex scanned the drunken man. Name, Aegis Cornelius. Age, 88. Sex, male. Cultivation details, Earth immortal. Species, human. Condition. Drunk. Remarks, a child that never grew up. Lex raised an eyebrow out of curiosity. He had dealt with Quenheld enough so that he was no longer intimidated by the thought of someone from the royal family. But an immortal who also happened to be from the royal family, tracking him down specifically with the plastic fork in his hand. This required a bit more caution. But it mattered not. Not only did Lex have ways of protecting himself, Aegis seemed to have forgotten whatever his task was. The remark, alongside his reaction from when he had his drink, gave Lex some ideas on how to proceed with helping him overcome his drinking addiction. Once Lex told Fenrir that Aegis would take him hunting, he became extremely excited and began jumping up and down with excitement. Aegis too wasted no time and quickly took Fenrir alongside him outside the town formation. The darkness did not intimidate the dog, and the various monsters that suddenly turned their attention towards them seemed only like playthings. Fenrir looked at them with his head turned out of curiosity. He was supposed to hunt these things? He felt no threat from them though. Whatever, he would treat it as a game. He bared his teeth and leaped into the closing horde. Weak as they were compared to Fenrir's own strength, the pup's total lack of combat experience immediately began to show. Fenrir did not give up though, as the pain from the various attacks unlocked a memory it had suppressed. It recalled the pain it had been feeling from even before it was born. It remembered its flesh being torn open and stitched back again and again, helpless and unable to even understand. Most of all, it remembered a vague memory of another pup, of a sibling, maybe. Slowly, the anger that had been buried deep within its bones, but had turned cold due to a simple and easy life, began to rekindle. Slowly, his viciousness began to return. Slowly, Fenrir began to step onto the path destined for it. Back at the tavern, Lex turned to Joseph. Before they were interrupted, they had been probing each other, silently and secretly. Now, though, before they could return to such a state, Lex took control of the situation and diverted the conversation. I'm sure you have much on your plate right now, with all that has happened, but if you get some free time, there are some things I could use your help with. Of course, I would not take your help for free, and we'll see how I can repay you. Maybe I can even ask my friend to help out with some matters, though at most he will help get some precious materials instead of directly helping out. Bertram and Joseph both turned towards Lex, interested in what he had to say. Farty, who had been drinking on his own all this time, had fallen asleep at the bar and was lightly snoring. Though Lex still did not know the details of what had happened to their family, he assumed that his presence was not required for such important conversations. After all, his personality seemed more in line with partying than actually working. I'm in need of energy, massive stores of energy. Something like spirit stones won't cut it. I've seen crystals before, completely clear crystals that contain extremely pure and dense energy that are used by the crystal race for cultivation. If you can get your hands on those, I'll try my best to satisfy your requirements as well. How many do you need? Bertram asked, his voice steady, not revealing what he was thinking. Not many, about 100 would do. 100? Bertram and Joseph were both startled. Unbeknownst to Lex, they actually had a mine from which they extracted such crystals, but even so, producing 100 of them was a monumental task. 100 is impossible, but I'll see what I can do. The question is, how will you pay for them? Providing you with a formation like mine is impossible, Lex said flat out. But I can procure other precious materials for you. I'm not sure what will be available, but you can provide a list of things you need and I'll see what I can get. The father and son exchanged a glance and no doubt had a mental conversation, discussing the details of their trade. The truth was, Lex wasn't really in need of energy. Asking for the crystals was only the first step in helping them become more comfortable trading with Lex. This was because the rare items he said he could procure would come from various requests in the guild room. Since he could ask for rare materials, he could skip the middleman and directly ask for concentrated energy stores. In fact, He had already put up various requests in the guild room for energy stores or batteries or whatever. Since he had interrealm broadcast now, he'd be able to summon items from the inn which had, essentially, resolved his energy crisis. It was only a matter of time now. What Lex was truly after now was secrets only strong natives would know. He wanted to know the history of Craven. Although the elder from the Crystal Realm he met hinted at the fact that he could find out from him, Lex did not want to place all his chips on a single horse. Once the Noel family began to trust him a bit, he could begin his investigation. Chapter 374 Making a Plan. "Save me," roared a bunny, but it was of no avail. It was each rabbit for itself right now. Deputy Commander Captain Jimmy was having trouble holding on to the rabbit he had begun to ride, but he was, after all, not ordinary. He had built up the Peacock Warriors side by side with Princess Layla and had conquered many beasts. Only the ever-elusive flying whale had remained safe from him. Not even the mini-boss of the inn, the giant turtle, had been able to avoid being his mount. Though to be fair, the turtle never tried to resist to begin with. Still, Jimmy was a relentless child. He had affixed himself onto the large rabbit's back by clamping his thighs shut, and he was holding on to its ears like a harness. It could jump around as much as it wanted, but he would never let go. Or so he thought. "Jimmy, it's time to go," called his mother, who casually walked through the chaos of the child zone, informally now known as No Man's Land. When all the children in all the inn, human, beast or otherwise, all gathered together in one area, there was bound to be chaos. In fact, egged on by the antics of their counterparts, a few gangs had already formed in the No Man to compete against the Peacock Warriors. Furthermore, whoever was running the child care area was extremely sharp-minded. Instead of dispersing the gangs, they organized small friendly games to build competition between the gangs. They went from hide and seek, tag, puzzle solving, cooking, crafting and more. Each competition would net the winning team some points, and at the end of each week the winning team would have their name put up on a recognition board and win small prizes in a ceremony. Moreover, the competitions were short and were formatted in such a way that the entire gang did not need to participate all the time. Whenever someone from Peacock Warriors was available, they could take part in any competitions going on at the time. "Just a minute, Mom," Jimmy yelled back as he maintained his tight grip on the rabbit's body. A few seconds of crazed hoping later, an alarm rang announcing the end of the competition, allowing Jimmy to finally relax his grip. The rabbit and the boy both fell to the ground in exhaustion, but the difference was that while the rabbit was mourning the fuzzing of its fur, Jimmy had a wide grin. He had yet to lose a single competition. "Jimmy, let's go," said his mother once again, picking the boy up from the ground. "You have to complete your homework before your bedtime. Mrs. Evil Teacher has been complaining about your work lately." "No, Mom, no," he wailed, his good mood ruined. But alas, it was to no avail as his mother took his hand before both of them disappeared. In the distance stood Raphael, who had been watching the entire competition. His eyes were filled with strange emotions. In his past life, he had known Jimmy as a silent but hard man. He was a warrior like no other, and though he was not strong, he had distinguished himself from the rest due to his sheer grit. Watching him now, like this, enjoying games with friends and going to school like an ordinary kid, Raphael could not imagine this was the same person. He did not know what had happened in his life to turn him from this normal, happy child to such a dark and grim person. Whatever it was, Raphael swore he would not let it happen again. Jimmy had not been the closest friend he had in the future, and his achievements on the larger scale of things were unremarkable. Still, whatever he had was worth protecting. After all, there would be no point in his return to the past, or maybe his visions of the future, if he didn't change the future. Even if it was a small change that would only affect or protect one child, he would do it. This was merely his beginning. In the future, he would change everything. Joseph and Bertram were left feeling slightly awkward. Lex had asked for extremely precious resources, but in exchange, had offered vague payments. Saying stuff like he could procure precious or rare materials or treasures sounded more like a scam than anything else. Plus, whatever it would have to be equal in value, and then something they actually needed. After all, there was no point in gathering something valuable, but completely useless. Fortunately, Lex was not asking for delivery first and instead requested that they submit a list of items for him to locate first. If he insisted that they provide the crystals first, they would start to think that he was trying to blackmail them. Regardless, since Lex had requested that they provide him a list of items, Joseph quickly prepared one. The Noel family's speciality, publicly, was their treasure manufacturing. For certain items their production was halted or slowed due to the absence of some rare materials. It was not a matter of the Noel family being unable to pay for them, but rather of the items not being available in the market all the time. The list he gave Lex only had items that were either not available on the market frequently, or were so rare it would take decades for it to appear at all. Lex perused the list casually before putting it away. He would put down these items and their descriptions in the guild room. Hopefully, he would get a response quickly. With their initial business concluded, the Noel family left to go oversee and help with the citizen rescue. Lex was left nearly alone in the tavern, with only Rick, Roan, the sleeping party, and the children that had been put to sleep to keep him company. All others had gone in search of their friends or relatives. He knew for a fact that most of them were about to be met with disappointment. Even if they had survived the darkness, the killer, and the monsters, the destruction of Zagan's battle was thorough. Unless one was hiding underground, Lex did not think they would have any hope of surviving. And even then, it was only a hope and not a certainty. But, of all of them, he hoped that at least the triplets and Dino's families were all right. Only time would tell now. With that done, Lex retreated to the meditation room and put on his thinking cap. With everything that had been happening the past few days, Lex hadn't had time to properly reflect on all that had happened. By nature, Lex liked to have a plan to follow, and liked to think things out. It was not necessary to follow the plan to the letter, but at least the plan gave him direction. If he started from the beginning of recent events, the first was that he had been pulled into the killer's death bubble without any forewarning whatsoever. It was the first time his instincts had failed him entirely. He always knew that his instincts couldn't be entirely perfect, but he always assumed that it would be someone with a much higher cultivation level than him that would beat him. Instead, it was someone with a system. That revealed to him that, most likely, in all things related to systems, his instincts would likely not work. This theory needed further testing, but it made sense. The systems were something beyond common understanding after all. The next matter was that he was teleported out completely without any protection. Even though the tavern wasn't exactly as secure and in sync with the system as the inn, he had safety measures in place, but he was still at the mercy of the system. According to Mary, only a system was another system's weakness, so if he wanted to be protected all the time, he should never leave the inn, although he wasn't so sure he wanted to do that either. The next point of concern was that his new battle style using arrays was more or less a success. What he needed to do now was increase his implementation speed and thinking speed. Implementation could be sped up with practice, but increasing his thinking speed would likely require him to train in some kind of mental technique. That led to his next issue. He needed a reliable source of cultivation techniques. He could, theoretically, return to the Hum Nation and go back to the academy and search for techniques there, but he'd rather not risk it. He didn't know what danger had driven him away from there, and he was in no mood to find out. He had John, who could design techniques, but how long would that be a viable solution? He needed a new venue for techniques. The next issue was that he needed to up his practice with evisceration. If he had completely mastered the technique, even Lex was curious to see what kind of coincidence could have saved the killer from him. With these few, relatively simple points addressed, he now had to think about systems and system users. Chapter 375 Don't Kill. It was a matter of fact that, from now on, no matter who he met, a part of him would always wonder if the other person was a system user. But excessive suspicion was not only really bad for him, it would actually distract him from locating actual system users since his attention would be spread so thin. What he needed to do was, keeping in mind everything he knew about systems, maintain a vigilant state for clues. Only if a person behaves oddly or did something out of the ordinary would he consider analyzing the likelihood of them having a system. Maybe this way he would miss out on actual system users, but the fact of the matter was that he had other objectives than just looking for system users, and if he didn't ration his mental capacity, he would fail in all his tasks. Moreover, once he did identify someone he suspected had a system, his surveillance had to be as discreet as possible. In fact, it would be best if he could spy on them at the inn. He did not enjoy undertaking unknown risks. As for what he would do once he was sure someone had a system, that was a decision that would have to wait till the actual situation occurred. Another thing he had to do was go through the list of people he actually knew, or guests from the inn, and gauge whether or not they likely had a system. From his actual personal life, he directly dismissed everyone he knew. There was no point in even considering he had lived too ordinary a life before the inn to even suspect anything mildly supernatural, let alone someone having a system. Then came his various guests. In lieu of their insane cultivation levels, Lex wanted to suspect Bautet and Phallic, but then dismissed the idea. Though they were strong, they did not do anything unusual enough to warrant suspicion. Next, he thought of Marlowe. To be honest, just based on how crazy his life had been, Lex wanted to believe he had a system. But if he did, he would not have lived with an injury for so long, nor would he have ignored his son's plight. Next was Alexander Morrison, but he was just rich and privileged, not crazy supernatural life system users. Then he thought of Ragnar. The general from the Jotun Empire sure had an epic story, even if Lex didn't know too much of it. But, again, he was strong and accomplished, but nowhere near supernatural enough. One by one, Lex went through the list of his guests. He considered the bodyguard he had during the midnight games, he considered Loretta's dad, he considered the various beasts he'd met and more. None of them had done things crazy enough for him to suspect they had a system. However, there were a few things that caught Lex's interest. Maybe if Lex wasn't sitting in the meditation room, which boosts his focus and concentration, and maybe if he wasn't wearing his thinking cap, Lex might not have remembered, or even considered these few suspicious points. The first was that the sovereign galactic turtle could influence his system. Not only that, the system had hired the turtle on its own. This was much too suspicious. Lex could not explain it, and his authority was not high enough for Mary to explain it to him yet. It came to the point where Lex began to wonder if the turtle had some kind of interference system that only worked on other systems, allowing him to share some of the authority. Still, Lex left some room in his mind to consider the fact that there was much he didn't understand yet about systems, and there could be other answers. Maybe the turtle's race was special and was being treated as such by the system. The next thing Lex noticed, or rather remembered, was that he encountered a few people his system could not scan. To be more specific, it scanned them, but Lex only got an error message. One was the bodyguard he had during the midnight games. This was the only reason Lex still didn't know his real name, and only later learned that he belonged to some race known as the Celestials. The second was his temporary worker, John. Just the error message was not enough to prove anything, but the error could possibly be explained with the statement that only a system was another system's weakness. Still, this was not enough to be sure. It was, however, enough to suspect them a little. His bodyguard was too strong, not to mention out of reach, but John was available right at his inn. He asked Mary if John had done anything suspicious, but the man had never done anything other than work and often visited the mystery trial. During the invasion the inn suffered, he helped out a bit, but none of his performance was too out of the ordinary. Lex told her to keep an eye on him and let him know if anything popped up. But other than those two people, he could not even begin to even mildly suspect that anyone had a system. It made sense, to be honest, for if systems were commonplace, then they would not be such a secret. Lex spent the rest of the day planning his future actions, and how he planned on growing the inn, as well as becoming stronger. The next day, Lex was faced with some good and some bad news. The bad news, predictably, was that a lot of people died. Dino and his wife's entire family was gone, as well as all their friends and everyone they knew from their neighborhood. The good news was that, since the triplets had several murders take place near their house, their entire family had moved out of fear. They were temporarily living in a town shelter. When darkness fell, they had been protected by the town guards and moved into the underground bunkers, which had been kept well lit using candles and lanterns. When Zagan attacked, the entrance to the bunker had been destroyed, but fortunately they had been resuscitated before all those trapped ran out of oxygen. Lex also found out that the Noel family would be migrating a large number of people to rebuild and repopulate Babylon, as they said it was a strategic point too valuable to give up. Lex did not comment. Instead, he turned his attention to Aegis. Fenrir had hunted all night long and the effects had been drastic. Though the pup was completely covered in wounds, he was not deterred. In fact, he started to display a bit of bloodlust that even Lex could feel. Even the look in his eyes became more savage. The change had been so drastic that Lex stopped the hunt temporarily to let him recover, both physically and mentally. Aegis was waiting patiently for Lex to give his next request, for he was extremely parched and it was not water that would quench his thirst. "Sit," said Lex, as he invited the man to a private room. "Before we get on to the matter of further payment, would you mind telling me why you were looking for me?" Aegis showed signs of struggle for a mere moment before he shamelessly betrayed his father. "Old Pops wanted me to go and get your cultivation technique. He told me to agree to whatever price you wanted, so long as you agreed to hand over the true path cultivation technique." Lex raised an eyebrow out of curiosity. There was a lot to unpack from that one simple statement, but he didn't want to divert his attention from his quest for now. He had only 2 days left and he had to use them wisely. "For the next part of the payment, tell me about yourself." "Myself?" Aegis repeated, surprised. "Yes, tell me about yourself. About why you started drinking in the first place. Tell me in detail, don't skip over anything." This time, Aegis struggled a bit longer. The look in his eyes was of one who did not want to look back at life, of one who had suffered immense torture and struggle. His eyes were a well filled only with pain, and now someone had asked him to bring out that pain, one bucket at a time. Still, the struggle did not last long. He gave in, and with a deep, depressed sigh, began talking. "I started drinking because life was just too damn boring. It's just so boring. When I was a few years old, maybe 6 or 7, I heard someone mention that old Pops was really strong because he cultivated the true path. I looked at the cultivation technique and, after a few days, learned all of it and began cultivating even in my sleep. Then I heard Craven were very strong, so I went to kill them, but then I killed so many that old Pops came and stopped me. I heard girls were..." Wait, said Lex, suddenly freezing. "You're saying, the king actually prevented you from killing too many Craven?" Chapter 376, Lucky Chance. "Wait, you're saying the king prevented you from killing Craven?" asked Lex, realizing he had finally touched upon the real secrets of this realm. "Yeah," replied Aegis, not at all fazed by the severity of what he was revealing. "I was very young back then, like maybe 11 years old, so old Pops never really knew who I was yet. But when I started killing too many Craven, he had to come and stop me. He said I was too young, and wanted to hide my potential." Lex calmed down a bit upon hearing that. If it was to protect and hide a very promising child, then preventing him from killing Craven made sense. It was still not incriminating enough. He said I should hide properly until I'm stronger and just focus on cultivation because it wasn't really easy. I got really excited when he said that. I never knew what it meant for something to be hard, everything was always so easy. But in the end, it turned out to be a lie. My cultivation was slowed because I was cultivating the true path, but I still easily reached the immortal realm. Everything I did was too easy. Learning was easy, fighting was easy, cultivating was too easy, killing Craven was too easy, finding a girlfriend was too easy. Life was just so boring. In the end, I gave up. There was nothing fun to do at all. I even considered taking on the Craven in a war, but old Pop stopped me again. At this point, Aegis stopped, his drunken visage retreating a bit and his expression turning serious. When I told old Pops about my conundrum, he offered me a new solution. He wanted me to defeat him, and if I did, I could become king. He said the challenge of running a country was immense, since it did not depend just on my efforts, but on the efforts of all its people. The offer finally enticed me. So we fought. It shouldn't have been hard. I had never lost a fight before, and Pops and I were in the same realm. At this point, Aegis trembled. But man oh man, a single slap from the old man nearly killed me. All the bones in my body broke and, in fact, shards of my ribs filled my lungs. To top it off, my spirit was completely disoriented and my soul seemed to lose its shape. But it wasn't all bad. I was excited, in fact. I finally found something that wasn't easy. He paused again, and looked at Lex with red eyes full of tears. Can you imagine? Finally, for the first time in my life, I found a challenge. I found something that I couldn't accomplish with just a little bit of effort. I found something to work towards. I trained like a madman, and improved beyond what I could have even thought, yet still only a single slap put me out of commission. But, instead of being deterred, I was even more excited. I worked, for years and years and years, training and growing beyond anything anyone can imagine. I fought Craven and Crystal Race alike until I could find no threats. I fought monsters born in caves so deep underground they've never seen light for as long as time has existed. My strength grew, and even my realm grew, until I reached the very peak of the Earth Immortal realm, surpassing my father who was still somewhere in the middle. After all of that, when we finally fought again, this time he didn't even need to slap me. Aegis started laughing as tears streamed down his face. He didn't need to slap me. He simply blew a whistle, the tune of which caused my spirit to collapse, putting me in a coma for years. The drunk began laughing as if he told the funniest joke ever heard, yet the tears never stopped rolling down his face. Can you imagine the feeling of finally finding something to look forward to, but it's not a challenge? Instead, it's an impossibility. For a long time, Aegis continued to laugh, while Lex felt slightly bad for him. Based on the little he heard, Aegis seemed to be some kind of never-before-seen genius, learning everything with ease. But the first time he encountered a challenge, it was instead an impossible wall to overcome. But fortunately, if this is what caused him to start drinking, he had a few ideas on how to solve it. But first, why did the king continue to stop you from killing the Craven even after you became an immortal? He said that, instead of the strength of one man, humankind needed to grow strong in its entirety. He said that even if I killed all the Craven, some other threat would replace them. The only real answer was that if the entire human race started producing geniuses like me more frequently. Lex frowned. One need not be a genius to know that the king was just providing a barely logical-sounding reason to prevent the Craven from being eradicated. This was such a strong contrast between the ideology he spread amongst the common people of the nation that Lex could not identify what the real reason behind it was. Do you know if any of the other races do the same thing, by preventing the truly strong cultivators from eradicating the Craven? I'm not sure. All I know is that the Craven no longer try to invade the Crystal Race. The last time they did, the Crystal Race retaliated so strongly that the Craven's war with all the races was affected. Unfortunately, the Crystal Race isn't too interested in the state of the realm, since no one can really affect them. The truth is, although I said that no one in the Crystal Race could fight me, that was only counting crystals around my own age. As an immortal race, they have way too many unbelievably strong cultivators just randomly sleeping around. For the rest though, maybe on average, humans aren't as strong as them, but humans have their own advantages. We are not pushovers either. Lex pursed his lips as he thought hard. The old man from the Crystal Race told him that those that needed to know the truth of the Craven knew it, and the way for him to learn was becoming important enough to have them tell him. He could tell that Aegis was on the periphery of that list, but not quite on it. He had not earned the trust of his father, or proven himself enough, and quite frankly, Lex could understand why. He had not hesitated at all to sell out the trust of his father, or maybe he never even perceived this information as a secret at all to begin with. Whatever the case, it made sense that he had not been brought into the fold. Yet Lex was not ready to give up so quickly. Maybe he didn't know about the craven, but his position still exposed him to many secrets. Lex would thoroughly take advantage of this situation. "What do you know of the Noel family?" Lex asked, diverting the topic. Joseph Noel was a common adventurer who stumbled onto some huge secrets, Aegis replied just as casually as before. But he was smart about it. Instead of trying to hoard everything for himself, he made a pact with old Pops and gained his protection. In exchange for his protection, he offered old Pops a lot of immortal-grade treasures. "I don't know all the treasures he provides, to be honest, but I know a few. In fact, I'm pretty sure that there is an ancient Trilop graveyard under this town, full of immortal-grade fruits. I remember right before I became an immortal old Pops offered me one of the fruits. It really helped with my breakthrough." Lex's eyes lit up as he thought of many ideas. A secret garden full of valuable fruits. He wondered if he could find anything that would be useful to him. Moreover, since Joseph had proven himself a smart and capable partner of the king's, Lex wondered if he was exposed to the secrets of the craven. Lex asked a few more questions and when he was satisfied, moved on to actually trying to remedy Aegis' alcoholism. Though the man was 88 years old, Lex felt that in many ways, he was actually still a kid. His exposure was limited and so was his thought process. "Listen here," said Lex, leaning forward over the table as he looked him in the eyes. "I'm about to reveal the secret of why you can't beat your father to you, so pay attention." Lex's words struck Aegis hard, and he immediately started paying attention even though in his mind he was skeptical. He had simply accepted his father as all-powerful. "The way Joseph discovered some secrets, so did your dad," said Lex, completely making something up. "And now it's your luck, kid, because you've encountered your lucky chance as well." Chapter 377 Return of the Butter Knife. "What do you mean?" Aegis asked, feeling confused. "You guys are in the same realm, yet you cannot even touch your father's sleeve. Don't you think it's unusual?" There was a gleam in Lex's eyes as he recalled several novels in his mind. Good fiction was rooted in the truth, and so nothing he said could deviate too far from the truth. "Isn't it normal? He's old Pops, founder of the Hum Nation. How can he achieve so much if he was normal?" "That's different," Lex said as he shook his head. "I'm sure that you have realized that not everyone is as talented as you. Not everyone can cultivate as easily as you, nor do they achieve things at the same rate as you." "Of course I understand," replied Aegis. "If everyone was as talented as me, Pops would not need to stop me from killing the craven. It's because they're not as talented as me that we're in this situation." "Well, now that you know everyone is not as talented as you, do you really believe that the only reason your old man is stronger than you is because he's more talented than you?" Before Aegis even had the time to answer, Lex continued. "Because I can firmly tell you he's not. In fact, I can firmly tell you that the relationship between talent and strength is not nearly as important as you think it is. Otherwise, the human race would be doomed. After all, most humans can't even cultivate the true path. Everyone is stuck on a single path, yet that does not stop them from reaching the immortal realm." In fact, Lex had no idea what it took to reach the immortal realm, but he knew that according to his professor there were only very few true path cultivators, perhaps in the single digits, and though immortal cultivators were rare, they were not nearly as rare as that. Moreover, you may think that even if they reach the immortal realm, they're not as strong as you, or your dad. But I can tell you clearly that there are many people, many humans, who are not even 10th as talented as you, who are much, much stronger than you. Aegis looked at Lex skeptically, but before he could speak, Lex continued. "Maybe you're having a hard time believing me, but that's because your knowledge is extremely limited. For example, Lex used the tavern's formation to create a room right around Aegis' body and trapped him where he stood. Shock filled his eyes as he tried to resist, but he could do nothing as Lex slowly lifted his body in the air, twisted him around and sat him back down. Don't overreact, I'm about to let you go, said Lex a few seconds before letting the formation rest and having the room around Aegis disappear. Aegis did not react once he found he was freed, but he was certainly alarmed. It had been a long time since he felt so helpless. True, he did not go all out with his strength in resisting the power that held him, but as an immortal, it was not so easy to trap him to begin with. The point of showing you that was not to intimidate you, but to make you realize that there are many things that exist in this universe of which you have no idea. Your father may not be as talented as you, but he's much stronger than you. Why is that? The answer is simple: he had tools or opportunities that helped him push his strength far past what you can dream. It's like you're trying to fight him with a butter knife while he wields a sword. No matter how talented you are, a butter knife is no match for a full sword. But compared to your father, you're not even holding a butter knife. You're holding a toothpick and he has a spear. There is no comparison at all. Aegis was extremely skeptical, but he was also hooked. He wanted to deny everything, and just accept that his old man was akin to a deity, invincible and undefeatable. But a small, resilient voice in his heart refused to give up. It wanted to hold on so badly to any hope at all, and kept him from completely accepting defeat. So, what are you saying? That you can help me defeat old Pops? Not at all, Lex clarified. I just said that your old man no doubt had some kind of lucky encounter that helped him reach his current level of strength. As for whether you can reach his level of strength, or surpass it, is completely up to you. What I can offer you is an opportunity. What you make of it is up to you. Aegis bit his lower lip and looked down to the ground, a million thoughts racing through his head. At this point, he had completely forgotten his original objective of getting Lex's cultivation technique. To be entirely honest, he did not care about it at all, nor did the title of the crown prince entice him. He had long since gone past his pursuit of wanting to find something difficult to challenge him. Now all he wanted was to overcome the obsession in his heart of defeating his own father and then, maybe, look for something in life to live for. There were hundreds of billions of humans in the crystal realm. He didn't believe that he was unable to connect with any of them. All right, I'll take it. I'll take whatever you have to offer, he said, his voice a mix of desperation and dedication. Not so easy there, Lex said, as he leaned back against his chair. I have an opportunity for you, yes. But I never said I'll give it to you for free. What do you want? Aegis asked with pain filling his heart. Just because he was desperate didn't mean he was stupid. He knew that people might want to take advantage of him and his situation. A part of him even accepted that Lex was about to scam him when he heard talk of price, but he asked the question nonetheless. He was just that desperate. Want? Nothing. But the opportunity can't be given so easily just to anyone. The person has to be worthy of it, so, now, before I give it to you, or even tell you about it, you have a choice to make. Slowly Lex lifted his hand and revealed the small jade bottle from which he had gotten his previous drink, before placing it on the table in front of Aegis. You have to choose. You can choose the drink in front of you, and get lost in the feeling it provides you. Or, you can take an oath, the most powerful, meaningful oath you can, to never touch any intoxicant again until you defeat your father. Lex paused for a moment for Aegis to absorb his words, then said, Now choose. There was a slight moment of relief as Aegis was finally convinced Lex was not trying to scam him. After all, it made sense for Lex to only want to give the opportunity he wanted to the most worthy. But that relief was followed by an intense struggle. He wanted that drink so bad. The sensation, the feeling, the pleasure it gave was all too great. But the small voice in his heart could not let go. Finally, when it could see hope again, it could not give up. At first it was only a small voice, but eventually it consumed him until Aegis could no longer see the bottle, but only the defeated figure of his father. Suddenly, he stood up, pushing away the seat upon which he sat, and said in an ominous voice, I swear upon the tenets of my immortality that I, Aegis Cornelius, will never touch another drink again until I have defeated my father. As the echo of his voice dimmed, Aegis' aura exploded and his entire being seemed to undergo a huge change. If Lex hadn't locked Aegis down in a small room, the aura from his sudden elevation would have squashed all the surviving residents of Babylon and destroyed the tavern building. His drunk eyes seemed to clear as drive and focus filled them, and his languid posture straightened to that of a soldier. Lex cared for none of that, though. He instead was focused on his system notification. New notification, quest complete. Reward, midnight signature brew coffee, 1-minute butter knife token. Lex was perplexed since the reward for this quest had already been declared as only the signature coffee brew, so where did this new token come from? He read its description to further investigate. 1-minute butter knife token. The butter knife is the god of all weapons, and a measly spear is putting in front of it. Use this token to strengthen the butter knife to its final form for 1 minute. Remarks, even the gods will kneel before toast that has been buttered well. Chapter 378 Only the best. Lex had to stifle his laugh as he read the remarks for the 1-minute butter knife token. It seemed the system had felt offended at his disregard of the butter knife. To be honest, his remark had been somewhat motivated by how little the knife had helped him of late. Indeed, in the beginning it had helped him, but even with its upgrade from butter knife to fruit knife, it was merely able to handle golden core cultivators. Sure, that was still above Lex's power level, but he had many powerful workers at the inn now in front of whom a measly golden core cultivator was nothing. But it seemed he had taken the butter knife lightly, as its upgrade sounded monumentally strong. Its description did not give an exact power level at which the knife was effective, but the remarks made it sound especially strong. Lex knew that the system liked to joke or make fun of him, but in these matters it was extremely serious. Just the mention of so-called gods in the remarks made Lex believe that it was incredibly powerful. Well, he hoped he was not wrong, and so he kept it as a backup during an emergency. After all, unlike the butter knife itself, which could only be used within the Midnight Inn, the token could be used by him anywhere. It was a decent reward, not to mention the original reward. Midnight signature brew coffee. A reinvigorating brew that can completely replenish a drained mind for an hour. Can be strengthened to match various cultivation levels based on the host's authority. Repeated use in a short time reduces its effects. It was not a bad addition, and it was relatively cheap. But, since the strength of the coffee could be changed based on the cultivation level, he decided to use different prices for different levels. While the most basic version, which reinvigorated chi training cultivators, had a profit of only 1 MP, the highest authority Lex had to serve, which was the nascent level, had a profit margin of 150 MP. But Lex moved his thoughts away from his notification and turned his attention back to Aegis. Now that he had completed his quest, it was now time to deliver. Even for that, Lex's capitalistic mind, his resourcefulness, allowed him to come up with a plan that would benefit them both. Lex waited a few more minutes for Aegis' apparent breakthrough to conclude and for him to settle down, before he asked, "Tell me, Aegis, what do you know about the universe?" "The universe?" Aegis repeated, confused. Lex had been speaking their local language, so the word he used for universe was correct, but therein lay the issue. Whenever anyone referred to their world or area within which they exist, they used the word realm. Even the word universe was a secret known only to a few, to the point where it was completely alien to Aegis. Simply put, the world that you know, the realm, the people, everything is only a small part of a much bigger one, that being the universe. The entire crystal realm is like a grain of sand compared to the universe at large, and it is full of countless other realms just like the crystal realm. There, not only can you meet those much stronger than yourself, you can learn and experience things far beyond your imagination. The Ascension Realm. Aegis suddenly said with a startled face, as if suddenly realizing something. There are rumors that when someone surpasses the Earth Immortal Realm, the Crystal Realm can no longer accommodate them, and sends them away to the Ascension Realm. Honestly, for fear of being sent away is the only reason I can think of for why my father hasn't broken through yet. So it's true. Lex paused, for he had just heard something new. No one had mentioned this so-called ascension realm to him so far, but it made sense since he was so far away from entering the immortal realm. But whatever it was, he was glad that Aegis knew of it, for it made his job easier. Yes, like the ascension realm. But even that realm is merely one of many, many realms in the vast, never-ending universe. Yet despite its vastness, there exists a place that can reach even the far corners of the universe, and can connect all the many realms. The name of that place is the Midnight Inn. Lex barely whispered the name, yet it clapped like thunder in Aegis' ears. He could not even imagine, despite his immense strength, a place that could connect all the realms in the so-called universe. In fact, he could barely comprehend that there existed more realms even beyond the Ascension realm. Suddenly a thought occurred to him and his eyes shrunk to pinholes. Midnight Tavern, he said, as if just the name was a connection unto itself. Lex merely smiled, and made no comment on that. Instead, he continued with his explanation. The Midnight Inn is a place where everyone is welcome as a guest, so long as one follows the rules. Yet one has to be extremely lucky if they wish to become something more than a simple guest at the inn, and actually work for it. The opportunity one can present you with is a single chance to try and become an employee of the inn. Of course, it's completely up to you if you don't want to, and can back out right up until the last moment if you think it isn't worth it. But, at least, you can go there and see for yourself. Aegis absorbed the information, and though he didn't show it on his face, he had doubts about becoming an employee for a place he didn't understand. Fortunately, Lex was in no rush, mostly because golden and platinum keys couldn't be used here until he officially returned to the inn and linked the crystal realm to the inn. You don't have to decide so quickly, for it will take me some time before I can provide you with the opportunity to enter the inn. But just know this, I can provide you with an opportunity to enter the inn for free once. But if you really want to avail the chance and become an employee, you have to do something else first. What's that? Nothing much, you simply have to deliver a platinum key to Zagan, and convince him to use it. Aegis smiled weakly. Of course, nothing so great could come easily. The question was, how was he even supposed to track the Ocean King? Even though he didn't know what he would do in the future, he began planning already for how to find the monster. In front of Cornelius stood Nora Haugen, his wife, and Quenhild Haugen Cornelius, his daughter. Though something unusual was that his daughter seemed to have lost all of her cultivation, and was akin to a mortal. Yet she was not disappointed with that fact. Instead, there was a hint of pride hidden in her eyes. So you've succeeded? Cornelius asked. Yes, and I'm here to complete our deal, said Nora, as she handed Cornelius a crystal with Quenhild's latest cultivation method inside of it. Throughout this process, Quenhild said nothing. The reason for that was her mother had sealed her mouth and body, for the little girl would no doubt pick a fight with Cornelius. She couldn't allow her daughter to ruin her plans when they were about to bear fruit. Good job, little Quen, he said, not letting on the fact that he had once again forgotten about her right up until they showed up here. You will be my second child to cultivate the true path, though I hope your performance is better than little Aegis. If you're half as good as that Lex child once you start on the true path, I'll consider rewarding you again. Quenhild, because she was frozen still, could not show her alarm when she heard Lex was a true path cultivator, but suddenly everything made so much sense. No wonder he was so strong. But after amazement, sorrow filled her heart. Despite everything Nora told her, she still considered Lex as her half-brother and had already decided that he must have had a very tragic past. Hopefully, his future would be better. We'll be off then, Nora said, and summoned the metallic card given to her by Cornelius as payment for the technique. She held onto her daughter's shoulder and crushed it, disappearing instantly from where they stood. A second later, they appeared in a hall in an entirely different realm, with an old man with a long, white beard standing waiting for them. Welcome to Ventura, the largest school in the universe, the man said politely. If you have arrived here, you most likely already know our policies, but I will repeat them for you nonetheless. Here, in Ventura, we only accept the best of the best. Whether it's your talent, your will, your character, your determination, your cultivation, or anything else, at least some aspect of yours needs to be of sufficient standard to gain entry. But fret not, for if you fail our admission test, there is still hope for you in one of our subsidiary schools, such as Ventura Platinum, Amethyst, Gold, and so on. Now, which one of you will be taking the test, or will it be the both of you? Chapter 379 Appreciation. This is not part of our deal, said Joseph warily, as he eyed the Crown Prince of Hum. It had been a few days since they last met and Joseph was busy taking care of things, still trying to understand exactly how or why the formation lost control. Yet while the duration was small, the change in his demeanor was massive. No longer did he look like a sickly child, moving lazily to do a tedious chore. He was a man with a straight back and a fire in his eyes. Everything from the way he looked to his expression, his voice, and even his actions seemed to have changed. While previously he was indifferent to the world, now his every action was filled with purpose. To be clear, this is not a part of your deal with Hum. This is a deal you're making with me, Aegis. Name your price, you will find that my reach will surpass your expectations. But at the same time, do not think this is something that can be avoided. At times, it is simply best to make use of the opportunity before you. Joseph actually felt a great threat from Aegis as he said this. He was literally being blackmailed into selling secrets to Aegis, and being threatened of the consequences if he continued to state a price. Basically, Aegis did not care how high or low the price was, so long as one existed. As much as he hated being bullied like this, he had to face the truth that in both status and strength he was below Aegis, and so there was really nothing left to negotiate with. He had to concede. Suddenly, he had an idea. In fact, there is something you can help me with. A son of mine broke off his engagement with his former finance, who is from a family of great means. If you can get rid of the pressure from that family and ensure they won't attack us in the future, the prize will be yours. Simple enough, Aegis commented blandly. Tell me the name and location of this family. I will deal with the situation myself. Excellent. It had been over 10 days since Lex last spoke to Aegis, and the man had disappeared since. That did not worry Lex, as the man had taken his oath and was definitely interested in what Lex had to offer. Well, if he didn't, Lex would find some other way to hire Zagan. Though that was not his concern right now. Currently, he was watching the finale of the Lady Cosmos show. The winner, after a lot of drama, was the fox from Nibiru called Jill. Not only was she officially crowned the first intergalactic Lady Cosmos, but she was awarded a cash prize equivalent to 30 million MP, raised from the profits the show generated. Of course, they were only a small portion of the profits. Jill, now an extremely wealthy woman, decided not to return to Nibiru. She had not taken up Lex's offer to work as an employee at the inn yet, but with 30 million MP, and a normal room costing 50 MP a night, she had 600,000 days to decide on an alternative solution. Once the show concluded, the number of guests at the inn began to drop drastically, so much so that for the first time in a while, Lex had fewer than 1 million guests. Though he did not mind whatsoever. Just from his own profits, Lex had generated a massive 22 billion MP more in the last few days, and 770 million MP was given to him by the Lady Cosmos show as his share of the profits. This put his total MP to 31.9 billion MP. Suffice to say Lex was not worried about his finances at the moment. In fact, it was to the degree that he had been dropping MP like crazy to accumulate energy. At the moment, he had already filled his progress bar to 91%. If he still had his elevated authority, he would have been tempted to stay a little longer and use this accumulated energy to enhance the inn. Now all he wanted to do was return home to the Midnight Inn. Especially because, in another 10 days, Harry Styles would officially be marrying Haley, the contestant from the Lady Cosmos show. He did not want to miss the wedding. After all, it was the first time one of his employees would be getting married. During this time work on the reconstruction of the town Babylon had already begun, and because of the intensive requirement in labor, everyone had been conscripted. As such, Lex had almost no guests these days, and any who came would usually only stay for a meal. It was almost, because he did have one guest staying, Roland. The young entrepreneur had become an orphan, like many other of his friends. He did not have a massive outburst like many of the other children when he heard the news, but he had barely spoken since. While the other children had been taken into the care of the town, Roland somehow convinced the mayor to let him be on his own. He had since been living at the tavern. Lex had tried striking up a conversation a few times, but the boy was not ready to speak just yet. While Lex was lost in his own thoughts, Rick knocked on his door and told him that Aegis had come to see him. Curious as to what the crown prince wanted, he got up and walked into the main hall where, surprisingly, Aegis was sitting on a table with Roland. The two had been whispering something, but the moment Lex entered they hushed up. "I heard you were looking for me," Lex inquired politely, more interested in what he had been talking to the child about. "Yes. I know you did not ask for it, but I cannot accept favors from others lightly. Though it pales greatly in comparison with what you're offering, I got something as a token of my appreciation." Chapter 380 Glow. Lex was taken by surprise as he was honestly not expecting it. Mostly, it was because the opportunity he was presenting to Aegis was already actually taking advantage of him to do his own work. Still, he could understand the gesture. After all, as a crown prince, he was surely taught etiquette and surely put a great deal of emphasis on reciprocation. "You really did not need to," said Lex, "but since you have already gotten something, I will not refuse your goodwill." "Great," Aegis said with a hint of excitement in his voice. "We need to go somewhere to get to it, so whenever you're ready, we can head out." Had it been before, Lex would have hesitated to leave the tavern. He had already exposed himself, and if he left the boundary of the tavern, he would have been defenseless. But, since he had the butter knife token, Lex could barely convince himself to head out. After all, in matters such as this, he still trusted the system's integrity. "We can head out now," said Lex, casually, as if he had nothing to lose by leaving the tavern building. He passed a few instructions to Roan in case they had guests while they were gone, and left the tavern with Aegis. "Do you mind if I speed us there?" asked Aegis, once they stepped out. Since the tavern did not have the same protection as the inn, Lex's foundation realm cultivation was evident for all to see. Some were convinced he was actually just hiding his own cultivation level and was secretly an expert. Aegis did not try to test him and directly proposed taking the both of them himself. Once Lex agreed, he placed a hand on Lex's shoulder and rushed them to the other side of Babylon. It barely took a single second. Yet from the tavern building they had quickly arrived at one of the latest buildings that had been temporarily set up whilst reconstruction took place. He led Lex in, where Joseph and Bertram were waiting for them. "The formation is ready, I can take you in whenever," said Joseph, leaving his son behind to stand guard. With a nod from Aegis, they prepared the formation and stepped on it. Like an elevator, the formation started to descend downwards, only it seemed to be taking them down directly through the ground. Lex did not let his surprise show and only calmly observed as they descended for a good 2 minutes, before arriving in some kind of underground cave. The cave was filled with a sharp, blue light that illuminated every nook and cranny, even causing Lex to squint. Yet the blue light was not a fashion choice, and was being exuded by a single, small crystal. Lex did not need to be introduced to know that he had arrived in front of some kind of immense treasure, for the cave was so dense with spiritual energy that it started to condense right on Lex's skin. Had his meridians not been remolded out of metal, he would have suffered from spiritual energy poisoning just from standing there. The two immortals that came along with Lex slightly nodded at the scene of him being unaffected by the spiritual energy, silently confirming that he was well above his apparent cultivation level. Normally, Lex would have caught the action, but currently he was too distracted by a voice speaking directly in his mind. "Mr. Innkeeper, sir, I detect something amazing in front of you," said the juvenile voice of the lotus in his mind. "Can I have it please, Mr. Innkeeper, sir? I'll pay you back, I promise." In his mind, Lex visualized a child tearing up as he heard the lotus pleading. He had no idea what the crystal was, but if even the lotus wanted it, it had to be amazing. "It's not much," said Aegis, "but please accept this token of gratitude from me." Joseph was startled by what he heard, and suddenly started wondering what had happened between the two, but knew better than to ask. I've kept a small piece of the crystal as well to lure out Zagan when I need to, but the rest is all here. The shining crystal was only as large as an adult human fingernail, but its small size did not deceive Lex at all. It must be filled with either immense power or energy. How can I give it to you? Lex asked the lotus. Just eat it, and I'll absorb it from within your body, the lotus exclaimed with shrieking excitement. This was the first time in its short life it had ever wanted something, and the first time it was getting it. The experience was overwhelming, especially since the noble innkeeper had to suffer a loss just so that it could have the crystal. How was the lotus to ever know that to Lex, the lotus was already way more valuable than any crystal? Well, don't mind if I help myself, said Lex out loud and walked up to the crystal. Joseph was just about to explain to Lex the safety precautions required to handle the extremely radioactive crystal when his jaw dropped as he saw Lex pick the crystal from the cave wall and pop it in his mouth like a tic-tac. He did not even need to swallow it, as the moment the crystal touched his tongue it was absorbed into his body, filling him with overwhelming heat. But, just as quickly as the heat arrived it disappeared, leaving only the sensation of warmth on his back where he had a lotus tattoo. Joseph and Aegis both had not recovered from the horror they had just witnessed when Lex released a comfortable groan. A pool of spiritual energy had started flowing through his body, quickly elevating his cultivation level. In a matter of moments, it raised his cultivation level to the peak of the foundation realm. When his body could absorb no more, the energy instead started being absorbed by the system. The progress bar instant crossed 100%, and in fact had already reached 379%. But the energy in his body kept overflowing, and soon, his body started to release a blue glow.